Hey guys, tonight, we're doing something a little different. You won't be hearing about kings or castles or candlelit banquets with suspiciously undercooked goose legs. No, tonight you're stepping into a world where the air smells like rot and rosemary, where every knock at the door might be followed by a figure in black leather, long gloves, and a face shaped like a giant staring bird. That's right. Tonight we're walking in the footsteps of the medieval plague doctor, the original nightmare fuel. You'll trudge beside him down alleys clogged with chamber pots and chickens, past half-shuttered windows and whispering crowds, while he peers through glass lenses and breathes through a terrifying beak stuffed with flowers and mint. It's a bit surreal, really. Imagine your family is sick, your neighbor's already gone, and this masked bird person walks in smelling like a bizarre herb garden. He doesn't say much, just pokes at the sick with a long stick, nods grimly, and leaves you a paper talisman that basically says, "Good luck, and you probably won't survive this." So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I post slow, strange, relaxing dives into history. The weirder, the better. And if you're still awake by the end, comment where you're listening from and what time it is. I'm genuinely curious. Now take a deep breath through your imaginary plague mask and let's begin. You find yourself in a city you don't recognize, though. To be fair, you probably wouldn't want to. The buildings are timber and stone leaning inward like gossips huddled over a secret. The street below your feet is paved with mud, manure, and regret. A few dogs scurry away. There's no laughter, no bird song. Just a smell thick enough to slice. From somewhere nearby, a bell rings, not the happy jingle of a bakery or the cozy clink of a tavern door, but a long, slow toll. A death bell. Someone has died. Again. And here he comes. Down the road, you spot him, tall hat, long black overcoat, gloves, boots, and that beak. The plague doctor's mask isn't just strange, it's unnatural. The long snout juts forward like something alive, turning him into a creature, half human, half vulture. Two round glass lenses cover the eyes, giving him a blank insectoid stare. He walks slowly, deliberately, holding a long cane, which he uses not to walk, but to keep distance. Distance from the sick. Distance from the dying. Distance from everyone. And inside that beak, roses, mint, cloves, lavender, dried marjoram, crushed herbs so powerful they burn your nostrils just imagining them. It smells oddly fresh, like someone spilled tea in a graveyard. This wasn't fashion. This was survival. Medieval doctors believed in miasma theory, the idea that disease floated in the air like invisible poison spreading death with every breath. They thought that bad smells caused illness and good smells protected you from it. So they stuffed their masks with anything fragrant: petals, spices, citrus peel, even vinegar-soaked sponges. Historians still argue whether the plague doctor's outfit actually did anything useful. Some think the beak offered rudimentary filtration against airborne bacteria. Others think it was entirely psychological armor against panic, not plague. But one thing's clear, it was terrifyingly memorable. You watch him disappear into a darkened house. A few minutes later, he comes out. He's walking a bit slower. His mask tilts slightly downward, as if even he is not immune to the weight of the work. He scribbles something on a parchment and tucks it under a heavy stone. Then he moves on into the next street, the next home. The role of a plague doctor was somewhere between healer-mortician and reluctant angel of death. Some were trained physicians. Others were barely literate volunteers or unlucky hires by desperate towns. They were paid well, sometimes ridiculously well, but few lived long enough to spend their salaries. The suit wasn't standard until the 17th century, but early versions date back centuries earlier. A few doctors wore just cloth wrappings soaked in aromatic oil. Others dabbed perfume directly onto their beards. One even carried a hollow cane filled with dried herbs so he could sniff safety wherever he went, like a medieval vape pen with fewer regrets. And people wanted to believe it worked. When you've lost half your street to plague, you'll believe in anything that might help. A beaked doctor who smells like mint and roses. Better than no doctor at all. It's worth noting that the roses weren't just any flowers. In medieval Europe, roses symbolized more than beauty, they were linked with divine protection. Mint, meanwhile, was believed to purify and invigorate. These weren't random choices. They were scented prayers worn on the face. Even now, something about it lingers in the cultural memory. You've probably seen the costume in horror movies on Halloween shelves or deep in the recesses of your anxiety dreams. The plague doctor remains a potent symbol of fear mystery and medical desperation. He's both healer and harbinger, cloaked in ambiguity and eau de team. So tonight you'll follow him, not just through alleys and infected doorways, but through the why of it all. Why the roses? Why the mint? Why this bizarre ritual of fragrance in the face of the world's deadliest pandemic? You're about to find out. You trudge along behind the plague doctor, now keeping a careful distance as he vanishes into another alley. The narrow street seems to close in around you. Timber buildings leaning so close together, you swear they could shake hands across the top floors. The air here feels thicker somehow, more humid, more alive in the worst possible way. And then it hits you. The smell, not the gentle perfume of mint or rose from the doctor's beak that's gone now. You're outside the home of a sick family, and what leaks out the warped wooden door isn't something you can politely describe. It's the kind of smell that seems to climb inside your head and build a nest. Feces, bile, sweat, old bread, boiled cabbage, something worse. The truth is, medieval cities were olfactory nightmares. You step carefully around a puddle of something that could be soup or something far less edible. Streets weren't cleaned regularly at best. People tossed their waste out of upper windows and shouted Gardyloo in hopes no one walked under it. At worst, they didn't shout. Public sewers. Cute idea, but largely a fantasy in many areas until much later. Even places like Paris or London were known less for romantic strolls and more for what might stick to your shoes. And that's just normal city life. Now imagine the plague has arrived. Everything slows. Trash accumulates. People stop cleaning. Why bother when your neighbor just died coughing blood onto his laundry? It was the perfect environment for panic and for terrible theories. You duck into a side street where a man's hammering a red X onto a door. Someone inside is sick. Maybe 2 people. Maybe more. The family is now officially quarantined, which in the 14th century meant locked in your home with a prayer and a bucket. The stench naturally stays locked in too. According to the medical understanding of the day, this smell wasn't just unpleasant. It was dangerous. The dominant theory was miasma, from the Greek for pollution. Doctors believed that diseases like plague were spread through corrupted air, particularly from rotting organic matter. If it smelled foul, it was foul. Breathing it could kill you. No microscopes, no understanding of bacteria, just the nose, the gut, and an instinct that something awful was happening and probably floating around on a breeze. That's why people clutched sweet-smelling herbs to their noses, burned incense in their homes, and doused themselves in perfumes that would make a modern department store employee cry. It wasn't vanity, it was survival. This obsession with smell went beyond medicine. Entire moral systems were built on it. The poor were seen as naturally foul, while the rich who could afford soap and rosewater were thought to be purer physically and spiritually. A bar of soap became a social ladder. If you smelled nice, you were good. If you stank, you were probably sinful, or worse, contagious. One scholar even described the medieval city as a smellscape, a place where your identity, your risk, and your value were all tied to scent. You could practically map social status by fragrance. The bishop's residence, roses, incense, beeswax. The tavern ale, meat, wet hay. The poor quarter-boiled onions, sweat something indefinable and not in a poetic way. Historians still argue whether miasma theory slowed or helped plague responses. On the one hand, it encouraged hygiene air circulation and aromatic treatments, some of which accidentally helped. On the other hand, it ignored actual sources of infection like fleas on rats. So while people doused themselves in rosewater, the real culprits were nesting in straw mattresses and chewing on ankles. Still, miasma theory was persistent. It had roots in Roman and Islamic medicine, and it stuck around well into the 19th century. In fact, even when germ theory started taking hold, some doctors clung to the idea that bad air played some role, because honestly, it felt true. Walk past a cesspit in summer and tell me you wouldn't believe it caused disease. So here you are, walking through a city that reeks not just of death, but of anxiety. Everyone's sniffing everything. Herbs hang from doorways. Lavender is crushed into bed straw. Vinegar is sprinkled across floors. And that's if you're lucky. Poorer families can't afford fancy scents. They rely on whatever's local wild mint if it grows. Wormwood, maybe. Some chew garlic and believe it purifies their breath and blood. Others burn cow dung and hope the smoke drives out the illness. And it's not just individuals panicking. City councils commission massive purifications. Fires are lit in public squares to clean the air. Pine resin and juniper are tossed in. The scent rises piney, sharp cleansing. You might feel better just standing near it. But is that comfort or cure? Probably just comfort. You pass a child walking with a pouch tied around her neck. Inside a mix of herbs, some thyme, maybe rose petals if her mother could find them. She doesn't know how it works, only that it's meant to keep her safe. She smells like a spring garden, but she looks scared. You walk on. In a strange way, the plague made people more aware of their senses, especially smell. It was the first warning, the last comfort, and sometimes the only clue you had that something was wrong. It shaped how people decorated their homes, treated their bodies, even how they buried their dead. Later you'll learn that scent also shaped medicine, religion, and fashion. But for now, you simply breathe in, gag a little, and try not to step in whatever that is. You follow the scent trail, not the comforting whiff of crushed mint or roses from the plague doctor's beak, but something more unsettling. The smell of oil, of smoldering herbs, of desperation. You pass under a creaking archway into a courtyard where a few figures are gathered, each pressing something to their faces, handkerchiefs soaked in vinegar, bundles of herbs tied with string, even orange peels stuffed into nostrils. Everyone is trying to block the bad air. Everyone believes the same thing if they can just outsniff the stench they might survive. You settle against a crumbling wall as a man in a tattered robe lectures to a few anxious listeners. He's a doctor of sorts, and he's explaining the theory of miasma, the bad air. The plague rides the breeze, he says, eyes wide and sweating. It clings to filth, to rot, to moist places. You must keep your nose defended. This is the era's reigning medical dogma, miasma theory. Diseases don't come from tiny germs, they're born from foul-smelling air. It makes sense, sort of. After all, corpses stink. So do swamps, sewage, and unwashed humans. And those things are always close to outbreaks. So naturally, the nose becomes a weapon, a tool, a warning bell. You touch the herb pouch at your own neck. It's just mint and lavender bought from a vendor who swore it kept the plague away. You don't know if it works, but the smell is oddly reassuring, like holding a candle in a thunderstorm. The theory itself wasn't just medieval nonsense, it was inherited from centuries of observation. Ancient Greek physicians like Hippocrates believed air could carry illness. Islamic doctors, whose works were preserved and translated in Europe, also emphasized clean air and aromatic treatments. The logic evolved, but the root idea stayed firm. Clean air, health. Stinky air, death. And that's why plague doctors wore those beaked masks. Let's take a closer look, shall we? You find yourself standing behind one of them. The costume is intimidating up close, black leather or waxed cloth covering every inch of the body. Gloves, boots, a wide-brimmed hat signaling that this person is a learned man, at least in theory. But it's the mask that really steals your attention. It's absurd, honestly, like something from a surrealist's dream. The long, curved beak sticks out half a foot or more from the face, turning the man into a grotesque bird of prey. You imagine he should caw instead of speak. But no sound comes from the mask. Just the faint rustle of breathing and a subtle fragrance, something like dried mint crushed underfoot in a sunlit garden. Historians still argue whether the mask's shape was designed purely for scent, or if it had more practical uses. Some suggest it was meant to create distance between the doctor's nose and the foul air, perhaps giving time for any poisons to dissipate. Others think the herbs acted as a primitive filter, but no one agrees exactly who invented it. Was it Charles Delorme, a French physician in the 1600s, or earlier Venetian doctors experimenting with mask designs during repeated outbreaks? It's possible that no one knows for sure, and the idea evolved slowly, just like the plague itself. Inside the beak, doctors placed a mix of aromatic substances, rose petals, mint cloves, camphor myrrh, sometimes even vinegar-soaked sponges. The goal was twofold: protect the doctor from the bad air, and keep him from vomiting at the sight and smell of the patients. That's not a joke, by the way. Imagine walking into a home filled with decay, fever, vomit, blood, and hopelessness. You'd want something nice to smell, too. One quirky addition. Some doctors included crushed juniper berries or balsam resin for their sharp, almost medicinal scent. Others layered herbs with cotton to act as a sort of nasal cushion. The process was strangely ceremonial, like packing incense into a holy vessel. and in a way it was. You stroll through the square, watching others try their own versions. A merchant selling herbal sachets shaped like tiny pillows decorated with stitching and charm symbols. A mother rubbing her child's wrists with crushed thyme. A group burning rosemary branches outside their home, the smoke curling upward as if begging the heavens for mercy. Even animals weren't spared the sniff test. Cats and dogs were sometimes rubbed with herbs or killed depending on what people believed at the time. Rats were seen alternately as causes or victims. People were trying anything, everything. The city becomes one massive olfactory experiment. One strange fact. Some towns employed nose doctors, people paid to walk through neighborhoods and report back on the smell. If the stench was too strong, it was a warning that plague might be near. These smellers were sort of like early air quality monitors, except without the electronics and with much higher risk of dying horribly. Meanwhile, you keep walking. The mask feels heavier. The world feels smaller. And the herbs in the beak are starting to dry out. Their scent fades slowly like hope leaking from a cracked jar. You wonder if the doctors ever felt the moment when the perfume gave out, when the mask stopped smelling like flowers and started smelling like death again. The truth. The herbs likely didn't stop the plague. The fleas on rats were doing the real spreading hitching rides on people hiding in straw mattresses, biting when least expected. But nobody could see them. They could smell something was wrong, though, and so they trusted their noses. One final note before you move on: the shape of the mask itself may have had psychological benefits too. It made the doctor look otherworldly, untouchable. To the sick, he was a symbol of order in chaos. To the doctor himself, it was a shield not just from disease, but from fear. A way to say, I am here, but I am separate. You turn away from the square as a new bell rings. Another body cart clatters down the cobbles. The air shifts, and you tug the herb pouch closer to your face. Just in case. You pause in a crooked alley, watching a pair of plague doctors quietly inspect a pile of soiled linens behind what used to be a bakery. The bakers are gone now, dead or fled, no one is sure, and the scent that wafts from the linen heap is, well, let's just say it's not cinnamon rolls. One of the doctors reaches into a satchel and pulls out a tightly wrapped bundle. He unties the cloth, revealing something surprisingly delicate: dried rose petals, sprigs of fresh mint, a pinch of camphor, and what might be lavender still clinging to its purple color like a flower refusing to give in. He stuffs the bundle into the beak of his mask. You'd think it was a ritual. Maybe it is. You might be wondering why roses? Why mint? Why not something more dramatic, like crushed garlic or fiery peppers or a strong splash of whatever medieval Europe used instead of bleach? Because in the medieval mind, scent wasn't just scent. It was protection. It was medicine. It was theology. And occasionally it was a performance. Let's start with roses. Roses in medieval Europe weren't just flowers. They were symbols of purity, divine love, even martyrdom. Christian lore tied roses to the Virgin Mary. Medieval herbalists praised their cooling properties, believing rose water could soothe fever, settle nerves, and importantly, cleanse the air. When plague hit, people grabbed onto anything that smelled clean, sacred, or healing. Roses happened to be all three. But there's also a practical side. Dried rose petals actually do hold their scent for quite a while. Unlike some herbs that wilt into odorless mulch, a well-kept rose retains a soft, pleasant fragrance even after drying. For a doctor spending his days wading through death, that made a difference. You'd want the most fragrant, most enduring herbs available. Roses were dependable. Then there's mint. You lean against the doorframe of what used to be an apothecary's shop, now half empty and dim. Shelves of dusty bottles line the walls, some cracked open, others still corked tight. One jar reads, Mentha Latin for mint. Inside, dry green leaves, curled like tired fingers, still release a faint, bracing scent. Mint, unlike rose, didn't come with spiritual symbolism, but it was powerful. It grew wild and fast. It cleared sinuses. It masked foulness. Some medieval texts even claim it could restore the humors, which sounds lovely, if you ignore the fact that humors were bodily fluids people believed governed health. Too much black bile. Try mint tea. Nausea. Rub mint oil on your stomach. Facing a plague patient with open sores and breath like a dying goat, mint under the nose stat. The quirky part: people often combined herbs not for their medical synergy, but for how their smells layered. Mint cut through sour odors. Rose softened sharp ones. Clove added warmth. The mask wasn't just a filter, it was a perfume blend. An air-curated experience, if you will. Historians still argue whether any of this helped. Did the scent block bacteria? Doubtful. Did it give a placebo sense of safety? Probably. Some scholars believe it helped the doctors psychologically. The fragrance provided focus, comfort, even ritual, a small island of control in a sea of chaos. You return to the street and trail a man with a scented pomander swinging from his belt. It's a metal orb ornately carved with holes to let aroma escape. Inside, likely a mixture of crushed rose petals, mint cinnamon, and perhaps a slice of lemon peel. These weren't just accessories. They were armor. Poorer folks used cloth pouches or vinegar-soaked rags. Wealthier citizens opted for elaborate pomanders made of silver or gilded brass. And here's a fringe tidbit you might like. Some people believe that sweet smells didn't just block illness, they repelled evil. Yes, evil. The devil in many medieval sermons was said to travel on foul air. Demons were stinky, apparently. So wearing a rose-scented mask wasn't just medical, it was moral. It said, I'm clean. I'm righteous. I will not be claimed. You pass a nun carefully hanging dried herbs above a doorway. She murmurs a prayer as she does it, something about protection and light. The bundle she hangs is mostly rosemary and sage, but a few dried rose petals are tucked inside like a final flourish. It's not a cure. It's a statement. Even those who didn't wear the full plague doctor gear tried to mimic the practice. Some folks stuffed herbs into hatbands. Others carried small bouquets or wore garlands. Children were sometimes given scent bags to wear around their necks, lightweight armor in a world where no one had anything stronger. Not all attempts were fragrant, though. In some regions, people believed that foul smells could counteract the miasma. Yes, really. They'd burn hair, animal fat, leather. The idea was to fight bad with worse, like inviting one disaster to punch another in the face. You can imagine how well that worked or how it smelled. Eventually, you realized that the plague mask wasn't really designed for utility. It was part armor, part performance, part incense burner. A grim multi-tool for doctors facing the worst of humanity day after day. Whether it worked or not was almost beside the point. In a world that couldn't explain the plague, the scent of roses and mint was something you could control. You could choose your herbs. You could pack them into your mask. You could breathe through them even as the world crumbled around you. And for some, that was enough. You walk on the scent of crushed petals still faint in the air behind you. You continue walking through the narrow lanes of the medieval city, passing crumbling doorways and shuttered windows, each one hiding families from the sickness or mourning the ones it already took. But through it all, there's something oddly persistent: the scent. You notice it again and again, drifting from pouches around necks, smoke curling from windows or masks shaped like birds. It's not just perfume. It's belief made breathable. You stop by a small wooden stall near a fountain, one of the few still flowing. An elderly woman is carefully measuring herbs into tiny linen satchels. Her hands shake, but she works with practiced precision, muttering softly to herself. She offers you a sample anise fennel, a touch of rosemary wrapped neatly in cloth and tied with a strand of red thread. To keep the sickness out, she says. You accept it. For a moment, the scent is almost pleasant. Sweet, spicy, warm. Like something you'd find at a winter fair, not in the shadow of a dying city. This wasn't uncommon. During the worst plague outbreaks, people leaned into the power of scent, not just to avoid illness, but to find comfort. Perfume shops did surprisingly well, especially those willing to adapt. Apothecaries and perfumers often blended together, and some began selling what were essentially medieval essential oils pre-bottled in tiny glass vials. You stroll past a wealthier district now where a physician's home still stands relatively untouched. The family probably fled early, leaving only rumors behind, but his shelves are still visible through the dusty windows. Rows and rows of jars, many labeled with neat Latin tags: Rosmarinus, Melissa, Cinnamomum, Rosa Damascena. Each one holds part of a theory, an idea that scent could be a shield. The mainstream medical consensus of the time supported this. University-trained physicians, particularly those in Italy and France, advised patients to fill their homes with agreeable vapors. This meant burning dried herbs using rose or violet water or carrying aromatic charms. Some doctors even wrote elaborate plague recipes for perfumes that combined over 20 ingredients, including rare spices like saffron and cardamom if you could afford it. And there's the rub. Perfume protection was also a matter of class. Roses didn't grow in every alley. Mint didn't sprout in every yard. Some people had to rely on hay and boiled vinegar. Others paid vast sums for imported sandalwood or cloves brought across oceans by traders who cared more about coin than contagion. You could practically smell someone's status before they spoke. You lean against a post and watch a pair of well-dressed merchants walk by. Their masks are sleeker than the ones you've seen before, and the scent that trails behind them is unmistakably expensive. A pungent blend of rose musk and ambergris. The kind of smell that says I will not die in a common way. Meanwhile, a beggar on the corner clutches a greasy cloth to his nose, soaked in what might be vinegar and thyme. It's all he has. He keeps sniffing it over and over. Not because it works, but because he needs it to work. One strange and somewhat fringe tidbit. Some plague doctors took their perfumed protection internally. That's right. They didn't just wear scent, they ate it. Candied herbs were a popular remedy. Sugar-coated fennel seeds, violet petals preserved in honey-spiced rose pastilles. These weren't just tasty distractions, they were thought to ward off disease from the inside out. If you smelled good when you burped, you were ahead of the curve. You duck into the doorway of a modest home, where a mother is preparing a kind of herbal potpourri to scatter on the floor. Crushed mint marigold petals and dried lavender all go into a wooden bowl. She sprinkles the mix across the rushes covering the floor. This wasn't just for fragrance, it was a literal grounding technique. The idea was that your feet would crush the herbs and release protective aromas as you walked. Historians still debate how much of this was medical versus ritualistic. Were people truly treating illness, or were they participating in a kind of scented superstition? Some scholars argue it didn't matter. The psychological effect alone, the feeling that you were doing something, might have helped people survive emotionally, even if it didn't cure the disease. And let's be honest, emotional survival matters when death is on every corner. Back on the street, you spot a cart vendor hawking plague preventatives. He's got satchels, pomanders, little bottles of rose oil, and even crude plague masks fashioned from paper and beeswax. You watch as he hands a bundle to a wide-eyed child. "Smell this every hour," he says. "It'll keep the Black Death away." The mother pays him in coins she can't afford. She wants to believe. Who wouldn't? You follow her for a while. She walks slowly, clutching her child's hand with one arm and holding the bundle with the other. Every few minutes, she raises it to her nose. The child mimics her. It's a quiet, heartbreaking ritual, and it's being repeated all over the city in hundreds of variations. And still the doctors walk. You turn another corner and find yourself face to beak with one of them again. His mask smells stronger, more clove this time, less rose. Maybe he's experimenting. Maybe he just ran out of petals. He stares at you through glass lenses for a moment, then nods as if recognizing a fellow traveler in this strange perfumed war. Then he's gone. You remain the scent of mint and clove lingering in his wake like a question you're not ready to answer. You wander past the last of the vendors and into the quieter part of the city, the narrowest lanes where daylight barely reaches the ground, and the air is somehow both still and alive with whispers. Here, tucked beneath low arches and sagging balconies, you find a door swung open to reveal a place that smells astonishing. It's a medieval apothecary, or at least what remains of one. Inside, rows of shelves stretch from floor to ceiling, cluttered with pots, corked jars, bundles of dried stems, and more than a few crumbling labels written in Latin that only make sense if you've studied at Oxford or at least slept outside it. The air is thick with scent. Mint, yes, but also sweet fennel, peppery basil, dried rose, and a strange sharpness that might be crushed myrtle or old vinegar. This isn't just a shop, it's a perfumer's cabinet, a battlefield, a church of scent. You step inside, careful not to bump anything though. Honestly, if one jar breaks, you might leave here smelling like a salad. As you pass the cluttered counter, you spot a parchment pinned under a weighty mortar. It's a recipe faded and stained. The title reads, Fumus pestilentiae fume against the plague. It lists instructions to grind together rose petals, dried mint cloves, sage, cinnamon bark, and camphor, then place the mixture on hot coals. The resulting smoke, it claims, will purge foul humors from the air. You wonder how many families stood over bowls of this concoction, watching the herbs burn and hoping each curl of smoke was death leaving their home. You reach out and lift a glass bottle. Inside are what look like shriveled figs, but they're labeled ambergris, a whale byproduct more expensive than gold in its prime. People once believed its musky scent could ward off disease. If you were rich enough to own a jar, you might dab a bit on your clothes or heat it gently over a candle to scent a room. The result? A fog of fragrance that was equal parts divine disturbing and, frankly, fishy. And here's your quirky tidbit. For the day, some apothecaries sold plague vinegar, a concoction steeped with herbs like rosemary, sage, lavender, and mint in strong vinegar. People soaked handkerchiefs in it and pressed them to their faces. They also washed their hands and even drank the stuff. If nothing else, it made your breath formidable enough to keep both fleas and friends at bay. You move farther into the shop, reaching the back room where dried herbs hang from beams like wind chimes that forgot how to make noise. Sprigs of thyme, bundles of rue, bunches of rosemary long gone brittle. They look like relics now, but once they were hope hanging from string. The plague doctor you've been following, he might have visited a place like this, stocked his mask with whatever he could find. There was no universal formula. Some packed their beaks tightly with layers of scent. Others used hollow compartments. A few even carried extra sachets in their robes to replace wilted herbs throughout the day. Being a plague doctor meant being part physician, part fumigator, part desperate improviser. And the satchels, they weren't only for masks. You pass a work table where linen pouches lie open, each half filled with dried ingredients waiting to be tied. One contains mint, fennel seeds, and clove. Another has rose petals and marjoram. A third is more exotic bits of nutmeg, cinnamon, and dried citrus rind. You pick one up and inhale. The scent is powerful, clean, sharp, and oddly comforting. You can see why someone might carry this all day, every day. These satchels were worn around the neck, tucked into pockets or tied to belts. Some were stitched with charms, tiny embroidered prayers or symbols thought to protect the wearer. The smell was only part of their power. Belief did the rest. Historians still argue whether the people who used these herbs actually thought they were treating disease or merely surviving it. Was it medicine, superstition, aromatherapy, avant la lettre? The line between science and magic was blurrier than your vision after 3 hours of staring at old parchment. But one thing is clear, scent was serious business. And business, oddly enough, boomed. Apothecaries and herbalists were in high demand. Cities hired them to mix public fumigants. Nobles paid for exclusive scent blends. Traveling doctors bought herbs in bulk. Some shops even offered delivery service by runner, yes, medieval takeout, but for thyme and rosewater. You find an old ledger tucked beneath a shelf. The entries are faded but legible. Rose petals expensive. Mint affordable. Cinnamon very expensive. Vinegar cheap but in high demand. The quantities are staggering. Dozens of pounds sold per week, more when the plague was peaking. It's not hard to imagine the frantic customers banging on the apothecary's door at dawn, waving coins, begging for one more vial of protection. You glance up as dust floats through the air like tiny ghosts of camphor and crushed leaves. It's quiet here now, silent even. But once this shop was a hub of frantic hope, the smell of desperation masked by roses and mint. And you wonder, did any of it really work? No one can say for sure. The herbs didn't kill bacteria. The masks didn't filter fleas. But perhaps the scent helped in another way. Maybe it calmed the nerves. Maybe it gave people the courage to walk into a sick room. Maybe it gave plague doctors something to focus on besides death. Sometimes comfort is the closest thing we have to a cure. You leave the apothecary, stepping back into the street, the scent of ancient herbs still clinging to your clothes. And somewhere behind you, you swear you hear a door creak shut slowly, as if the shop is exhaling after holding its breath for centuries. You drift further down the lane, the fading scent of the apothecary still mingling with the city's ever-present mix of filth and fire. As you round a corner, you come face to face with a poster nailed hastily to a beam. The ink has bled from rain or tears or both, but the message is still readable. Physician with mask available for visitation. Brings own herbs. It's both advertisement and warning. You might survive if you can afford the man who smells like a garden funeral. Now seems like the right moment to talk about that beaked mask in full. The one that's haunted your dreams and accidentally become a Halloween staple. The image is iconic. A long-nosed mask like a crow's beak, glassy round eyes, a wide-brimmed hat, and a full black robe that drapes to the feet. Add leather gloves, boots, and a wooden cane, and you've got the complete look. You'd be forgiven for thinking this was standard attire throughout the Black Death of the 14th century, But surprise, it didn't become fashionable until the 17th century, especially in plague-riddled France and Italy. Historians still debate whether the full getup was invented by Charles Delorme, court physician to several French kings, or whether it evolved more organically across Europe. Delorme wrote in 1619 about a suit made of Moroccan leather and waxed linen designed to keep the pestilential air from touching the skin. He claimed it was a practical response to a deadly problem, but whether he created the mask itself or just popularized the idea remains up for scholarly squabbling. What's certain is that the beaked mask had a functional purpose, at least in theory. It wasn't just terrifying cosplay. The beak created a chamber between the doctor's nostrils, and the bad air filled with strong-scented herbs, dried flowers, and sometimes camphor or vinegar-soaked sponges. The goal: purify each breath, trap the miasma before it could invade the lungs. A medieval air filter. You step into the shadow of a stone chapel where another plague doctor is pausing to read a note nailed to the door. He doesn't speak, just stands there, mask unmoving, cane in hand. The scent wafting from his beak is different. He's using juniper and cloves. Sharp, resinous, almost aggressive. Like he's trying to punch the plague in the face with fragrance. You get a closer look at the mask's craftsmanship. It's not a crude thing, it's carefully sewn with tight stitches, reinforced nostril seams, and a lining of waxed fabric. The beak curves downward like a falcon's, and is long enough to hold several layers of herbs, plus a small compartment for dampened cloths. The design is equal parts medical, magical, and theatrical. You can't help but wonder, how did people react when they saw this? Picture it, your family is sick. The streets are silent. Then a man in full black robes and a monstrous bird mask arrives at your door. He doesn't speak, just taps with his cane. You open the door and he steps inside, breathing through rose petals and mint while scribbling notes and checking your loved one for buboes. It must have been terrifying. Some historians argue that the mask wasn't just for protection. It was also for distance, psychological as well as physical. The mask dehumanized the doctor, made him feel untouchable, less like a man and more like a tool. When you're surrounded by plague, that might be exactly what you need to do your job. It's not unlike modern hazmat suits, though, let's be honest. A yellow Tyvek suit is slightly less horrifying than a leather raven man with a cane. The cane itself deserves a moment. It wasn't just a walking stick. It was used to examine patients without touching them, lift bedsheets, prod boils, measure fever by proximity, and occasionally, as some records suggest, keep people at a safe distance. If your neighborhood was panicking and someone tried to mob the doctor, the cane served as a very medieval version of 6 feet apart, please. One odd fact, there was no standardized uniform. Each region, each doctor might tweak the outfit based on available materials or local beliefs. Some wore full leather, others used waxed cloth. Some masks had longer beaks than others. In Venice, plague doctors wore plain white masks and robes, creating a ghost-like appearance instead of the crow. In Germany, they sometimes used red-tinted lenses to protect against evil light. And not all doctors wore them. Many couldn't afford the outfit. Others didn't believe in its effectiveness. There are plenty of records of physicians visiting plague houses with only a scarf around their face and a prayer in their pocket. Still, the bird mask became the symbol. Why a beak, though? There's no definitive answer. Some say it was meant to mimic bird-like creatures thought to be immune to the plague. Others argue it simply made space for herbs without stuffing them directly up the nose. And then, there are those who point to ancient imagery of plague demons or death angels appearing with bird heads, suggesting that the costume itself was unconsciously modeled after supernatural fears. In a way, the mask became a ritual object, a transformation device. When a man put on the mask, he became something else. Not just a healer, not just a doctor, but a figure of death and control and strangely hope. People wanted to see him even if they feared him. His presence meant someone still cared, someone still fought. You look down the lane and the doctor's already moving again, robes fluttering slightly with each step. You can almost hear the crunch of herbs inside his mask as he breathes. Roses, mint, cloves, the scent of resistance. And somewhere, someone watching from behind closed shutters whispers, "Maybe he can help." You follow the doctor at a cautious distance, watching as he disappears into a tenement where the shutters are drawn, and silence lies heavy. There's no knock, just a soft tap of the cane against the warped wood of the door before it creaks open, letting the beaked figure vanish into the shadows. You stay outside, reluctant to enter, but the smell finds you anyway. No matter where you go in the city, the air carries an undertone of rot bodies, waste, and fear, all decaying together in the heat. And yet, over and over, people keep trying to cover it up with the only weapons they trust: herbs, flowers, and some truly bizarre alternatives. Let's talk about some of the stranger plague remedies, shall we? You wander back toward the market square where a few sellers remain, nervously hawking their wares to masked buyers. One table holds jars of pickled onions and vinegar. Another proudly displays what looks like powdered bone. A third offers a sign that reads, "Goose grease for swellings, proven formula." You blink. A woman next to you leans in and whispers, "It's for rubbing on the buboes. Makes them break faster." You don't ask how she knows that. Welcome to the medieval plague cure industry. When scent wasn't enough, or when people couldn't afford proper herbs, remedies took a darker turn. Goose fat, crushed emerald, burnt toad, and yes, dried unicorn horn, or what sellers claimed was unicorn horn, were all peddled as miracle cures. Many of these treatments were wildly expensive, comically ineffective, and occasionally poisonous. Still, people bought them, because desperation has its own economy. You pass a small stall where a man is selling dried frogs tied to strings. "Wear it on your chest," he shouts. "It'll draw out the black humors." Next to him, someone else offers a cheaper version, a poultice of mashed garlic and rose petals, which, while slightly more reasonable, still smells like a romantic dinner gone horribly wrong. And here's a particularly fringe but real tidbit. One treatment involved placing a live chicken's backside against the infected person's armpit feathers and all. The theory was that the chicken would absorb the disease its health exchanged for the patient's. If the chicken died, it meant the illness had transferred. If the patient died, well, maybe they needed a fresher chicken. Historians still argue whether these bizarre cures were driven more by folklore or by early attempts at empirical medicine. In truth, it's likely a chaotic mixture of both. With no understanding of bacteria or virology, people clung to anything that showed even the slightest hint of effectiveness, whether it was scientific magical or just disgustingly memorable. And amid all this, the role of scent remained constant. Even the strangest cures often involved something aromatic: garlic for its pungency, rose petals to soothe, camphor to cleanse. Even that unlucky chicken, sometimes its feathers were dusted with herbs before being applied. You cross into a side street where a woman is boiling something in a large pot over a fire. You get closer and recognize the contents: rosemary, thyme, mint, and vinegar. She's preparing Four Thieves vinegar, a legendary herbal tonic said to protect against plague when rubbed on the skin or sipped before entering infected homes. The origin story is as murky as the tonic itself. According to the tale, a group of thieves robbed the homes of plague victims without falling ill. When captured, they bargained for their lives by revealing their secret. They soaked themselves in a special vinegar blend made from herbs and garlic. Some historians think the tale was marketing genius. Others think it was half-truth wrapped in legend, but either way, the recipe became wildly popular. Apothecaries sold it in flasks with handwritten instructions. Even kings ordered batches. You watch the woman ladle the vinegar into bottles with cork stoppers. People line up, some masked, some not, handing over coins, and in one case a silver ring. She doesn't say much, just works quickly, her hands stained and her eyes glassy from exhaustion. The scent of the herbs is almost medicinal, bracing, but not unpleasant. You can't help but notice, even when the cure sounds ludicrous, the ritual is comforting. People believed in the power of preparation. Whether it was stuffing herbs in a mask, drinking vinegar, or smearing themselves in something absurd, the action mattered. It gave them purpose. It gave them a story. The plague, after all, is a silent, invisible thing. You can't fight it with swords. You can't reason with it. But you can do something. And so they did, over and over. You duck into a doorway as a cart passes by. On it lie 3 bodies, each wrapped in cloth. A man walks behind it, swinging a censer filled with smoking herbs. You recognize the scent: frankincense with a touch of sage. It's strong, overpowering. You feel it coat your throat like oil. Even death had a scent. The perfumed plague rituals weren't just about survival. They were about dignity. Even in the most hopeless moments, people tried to create meaning through fragrance, through ritual, through belief. And somewhere beneath the absurdity, there's something deeply human about it all. You step back into the lane, passing a young boy carrying a basket of dried flowers. He looks too young to understand why the petals matter, but he clutches the basket tightly anyway, like it's a shield. Maybe it is. You continue walking with that boy in your periphery, his tiny hand clutching the rim of a wicker basket filled with faded petals, crumbled herbs, and a sprig of lavender so dry it breaks like glass. He scurries off into a side alley, his oversized tunic flapping behind him, and you're left alone with a question that's been gently brewing in your mind. Were the plague doctors themselves scarier than the plague? You don't have to wait long for an answer. You turn a corner and find a mother pulling her daughter behind her, away from a robed figure approaching slowly down the lane. The child begins to cry, not because she's sick, not even because she's frightened of what's in the air, but because of what she sees a man dressed in black from head to toe face, hidden behind a beaked mask, eyes replaced with round glass lenses that reflect nothing. He looks like something from a fable meant to keep children in their beds. Except this fable walks, breathes, and taps a cane with every step. It's no wonder people were terrified. In fact, many records from plague years mention how residents felt their stomachs twist, not when they heard coughing or even the death bell, but when the plague doctor arrived in their street. For some, that beaked silhouette was not a sign of hope. It was an omen. He came after the sickness had already won. And imagine it from the doctor's perspective. You stuffed inside a leather coat in the blistering summer heat. Your hands sweaty in your gloves, your mask filled with the mingled scent of crushed rose mint and desperation. You knock at doors where no one answers. Or worse, someone does. You enter dim rooms where all the air has gone stale. The stench hits first something sour and wet, as if the walls are sweating, and then you see them families huddled together, faces, pale eyes sunken. Some still, some shifting, feverishly whispering prayers to saints that even the church has stopped naming. You don't speak much. You can't. The mask muffles everything. So you examine in silence, using your cane to lift blankets, point to swellings, prod a body gently to check for breath. Sometimes you write a note. Sometimes you deliver last rites because no priest will enter. The patients look at you and don't see a man. They see something between a ghost and a gravedigger. Historians still debate whether plague doctors were trusted professionals or mere placeholders, medical seat fillers. Some were trained, yes, university men, but many were not. Cities often had trouble recruiting physicians during outbreaks. No one wanted the job. So sometimes the city would hire whoever agreed to go into infected homes. Barber surgeons' apprentices, even criminals on pardon agreements. Some cities paid well, very well. Wages were raised to outrageous levels to lure physicians into high-risk areas. Others, however, paid poorly and relied on duty or desperation. In Venice, for example, plague doctors were state employees with contracts, strict rules, and little protection. In rural towns, the local doctor might be whoever owned a book of herbal remedies and a mask they stitched together themselves. In either case, the outfit added authority. That terrifying costume wasn't just for survival, it was performance. It made the doctor look like someone in control, someone scientific, someone with answers. In truth, most of them had no clue what they were doing, but the appearance of knowledge was enough to settle some nerves. You pass by a small window and overhear two people arguing softly. One insists that the plague doctor is an angel. The other says he's death incarnate. You realize both might be right. There's a strange, uncanny aura to the whole profession. No facial expression, no shared breath, no human warmth. Just that mask with its hollow gaze and flower-scented snout, the gentle tap of the cane, and the heavy silence of unspoken words. And then there were the rules. In many cities, plague doctors were forbidden from touching patients directly. They had to carry their own bedding food, even writing supplies. They were banned from eating in public and sometimes confined to their quarters between visits. The fear wasn't just from the public authorities worried that plague doctors themselves would become vectors of the disease. It didn't help that some did abuse their power. With so much freedom and so little oversight, a few doctors looted the homes of the sick, extorted payment from families, or disappeared entirely when things got too grim. There were good doctors too, brave, compassionate ones, but the mask made them all look the same. You stop and look up. Above you, on the side of a crumbling brick building, someone has painted a crooked mural. It shows a plague doctor larger than life looming over the city with one hand outstretched. In the other, he holds his cane. Flowers bloom from the beak of his mask. Tiny people kneel below him. Some pray, others hide. one offers a rose. It's unclear if he's saving them or judging them. The smell of mint and sage drifts by on a sudden breeze, followed by something less pleasant. You can't see the source. Maybe you don't want to. Instead, you imagine again what it must have felt like to wear that mask, not just the physical discomfort, but the emotional weight. To wake up each day, pack your mask with fresh herbs, and head out into a world that's slowly giving up. To know your patients expect miracles, and you've only got mint. You move through the crooked city lanes with your thoughts still fixed on that mural, the looming plague doctor with roses blooming from his beak, surrounded by people too small to recognize but too familiar to ignore. It's stuck in your mind, that strange blend of reverence and dread, like seeing a statue of a saint whose eyes follow you a little too well. You pause beneath an overhang as rain begins to fall, soft at first, then steady. It doesn't wash the stench from the city, it only blends it. Wet stone, old sweat, mildew, and something sour rise in the air. Yet amid that chemical swirl, you catch it again. The mint, the rose. Faint now, like a memory whispered from another room. You pull your collar tighter and duck into a shelter beside a tanner's workshop. No one's inside now, of course. The shop is abandoned, its tools left mid-task leather hides stiffening in the damp. The scent of cured skins lingers, a raw, earthy bass note beneath the sharper herbs that plague doctors once trusted. You sit for a moment, and that's when the realization hits you. For all its terror and superstition, the plague doctor's mask did something else. Something quiet. It comforted. Think about it, every time the mask was packed with mint or rose or marjoram, it wasn't just an act of medicine, it was a ritual. Something reliable. Something a plague doctor could control in a world where nothing else made sense. Imagine waking every morning to a world that's thinner, emptier, neighbors gone, friends fading, the bells tolling. You dress in layers of armor designed not just for disease, but for fear. And then comes the moment, the part no one talks about, when you carefully, slowly pack the beak. A sprig of mint, a scoop of crushed rose petals, a clove, a sliver of camphor. The scent builds like incense in a temple. As you breathe it in through the nostril slits, it reminds you of gardens, of kitchens, of safe places that now only live in memory. You're building a world inside that mask, a fragrant sanctuary in a sea of suffering. Psychologists today would call it sensory grounding, anchoring the mind with smell. And perhaps in an unintentional way, those plague doctors were doing just that, building a small wall between themselves and the chaos. Historians still argue about this. Some say the herbs were meant strictly for miasma defense. Others suggest doctors used them for more personal reasons, to keep from vomiting during visits or to drown out the scent of death. But a growing number of scholars believe that the smell itself became a kind of emotional shield. You stand again following the scent trail through the wet streets. You pass an alley where someone strung bundles of herbs overhead, thyme, mint, and even sagebrush. It doesn't stop the rain or the illness, but it's a gesture, a promise that people are still trying. Down another lane, you pass what must have once been a plague hospital. The walls are cracked, the roof half collapsed. But you peer through a broken window and spot a line of old hooks on the wall, likely used to hang doctors' masks after long shifts. You wonder how they smelled when removed, whether the scent of mint still clung to the leather, or if death overwhelmed it entirely. Inside, everything would have been chaos. Coughing, moaning, the rustle of straw-stuffed mattresses, and the occasional crash as someone collapsed or fled. But in the midst of it, the plague doctor breathed differently. He breathed through the roses, through the mint, through the mask that separated his body and his sanity from the rest. Back on the street, you overhear two women discussing herbs by a doorway. One insists that lavender helps her sleep. The other says mint keeps the spirits away. Both dab bits of linen to their wrists, inhale and sigh like they've just stepped into a garden, not a street lined with corpses. You're beginning to understand the depth of it. It wasn't just medicine, it was memory. When people packed their masks or wore scented charms or burned bundles of rosemary in their homes, they weren't just fighting plague, they were preserving something beautiful, something human. A moment of control, of routine, of grace. Imagine carrying that with you every day, a little linen pouch against your chest. You open it when the wind changes. You breathe deeply before entering a sick room. Maybe you close your eyes. Maybe you remember your mother's garden, a kiss in the shade of a rose bush, a festival, a meal with herbs in the soup. The body remembers scents more vividly than words, and the mind follows. Even today, smells are time machines. Open a bottle of mint oil, and you might remember school mornings. A whiff of rose water might transport you to your grandmother's perfume. For a plague doctor, those moments were more than nostalgia. They were fuel. They were armor. Some even took the ritual further. One fringe account describes a doctor who sang softly to himself while preparing his herbs each morning. Another reportedly kept a tiny icon of a saint tucked inside his beak, nestled among the mint leaves' holy breath sacred air. Did it save them? Not always. Many plague doctors died. Some didn't last more than a week. Others became so accustomed to the scent of death that even roses couldn't cut through it anymore. But some survived, and those who did carried that scent with them probably forever. You stop in the rain listening. No carts, no bells, just the soft sound of dripping water and the faintest trace of mint rising from a window box someone has refused to pull down. And for just a moment you think, maybe it worked. Not as a cure, but as a way to breathe through fear. You walk now through a corridor of silence, no street vendors, no crying children, not even the familiar clatter of plague carts. Just a row of shuttered houses, each marked with a red cross, each whispering their emptiness in their own quiet way. The city isn't sleeping, it's holding its breath. At the end of the lane, you spot something peculiar, a sign nailed to a crooked gatepost. Faded ink, worn corners, but legible enough. It reads, Public Health Notice. Fumigation required. You glance beyond the gate and see a crumbling tenement. Its windows are open intentionally, it seems, and thick, bitter smoke drifts from every crevice. Someone has lit a fire inside, and from the smell of it, they've tossed in every herb, spice, and damp rag they could find. You recognize some of the scents: rosemary, juniper, bay leaves, the sharp tang of burning mint which flares in your nose like pepper. Someone's even added orange peel. It's like a campfire built by a terrified botanist. This was early public health, medieval style. It might not look like much, but this ritual fumigation was a big deal. When city officials didn't know what else to do, they tried to smoke the plague out. They believed that by burning fragrant plants indoors, they could purify the air, drive out the miasma, and ideally cleanse the invisible corruption from walls, beds, clothes, and bodies. You don't step inside. You don't need to. The smoke reaches you well enough. But across the threshold, you spot a trio of figures moving slowly, masked and robed, waving censers of smoking herbs like ghostly priests in some dark mass. It looks theatrical, symbolic, but in that time it was practical. Cities across Europe issued edicts requiring fumigations, especially in places with high death counts. Paris, Florence, Milan, London. The instructions varied slightly, but always came down to this: burn herbs, burn incense, burn anything that smells cleaner than death. Sometimes they burned sulfur or tar, which sounds dramatic, but mostly just made everyone cough. Other times they filled public squares with braziers and had people walk through the smoke like livestock being treated for fleas. One Venetian ordinance required shopkeepers to smoke their goods, fabrics, spices, leather, before selling them. If the smell clung, it was safe. One fringe recipe, hand-copied into the margins of a 14th century herbal, suggests grinding bay leaves with dried rose petals, then tossing the mixture onto red-hot iron plates to boil the corruption from the air. Whether it worked or not is, well, doubtful. But the ritual was satisfying, a sensory display of resistance. You press forward down a side alley and find yourself near a bathhouse, or what used to be one. The sign is still legible, carved into a sagging beam above the door. Bathhouses were among the first places shut down during outbreaks. At first, people believed heat and steam could protect against illness. Later, they feared these damp, warm rooms might cause it. Even so, some were repurposed into fumigation stations, into plague wards, into places to burn fragrant bundles of herbs over steaming basins and hope the air would behave. Historians still argue whether these fumigations were helpful. Some insist that the smoke and heat did little more than temporarily mask the smells of decomposition. Others suggest it might have offered some indirect benefit, driving out fleas or making indoor air less inviting to pests. One theory even posits that some herbal smoke has mild antibacterial properties, though the concentrations required would probably choke a horse. You duck beneath a hanging sheet that once served as a privacy curtain, and the memory of scent clings to the fabric, distant now, like a dream, left too long in the sun. But you close your eyes for a moment and imagine its steam rising from a copper basin, a bundle of mint and rosemary crackling above it, the scent winding through the haze like something sacred. These weren't just health rituals, they were emotional ones. You pass a window where someone has arranged bowls of citrus peels, cloves, and dried petals on the sill. The bowl is cracked, the petals are gray, but someone went to the trouble. Someone believed that scent might stop death from climbing in through the window. And sometimes that belief is the only thing stronger than fear. You pause by a fire pit outside what may have been a hospital charcoal. Still warm bundles of scorched herbs scattered nearby. You pick up a blackened sprig of sage and rub it between your fingers. The scent releases slowly, gently, like breath, returning to a sleeping body. You remember reading somewhere that Roman temples used scent in their ceremonies, that priests burned herbs to purify space. Maybe these plague doctors were doing the same, turning houses into temples, street corners, into sanctuaries, each breath of smoke a prayer against the blackness. You hear voices again, soft, distant rising in a chant or perhaps a song. It's hard to tell. You move toward it and find a group of midwives and healers gathered near a pile of herbs, sorting what they can save. One woman hums a lullaby as she ties a bundle of lavender and rose. Another dips sprigs into vinegar and lines them up on a drying rack made of sticks. They're not doctors, but they know what the city needs. Fresh scent, clean air, and above all else, hope you can breathe in. The rain slows. You stand still for a moment, letting the mingled aromas wrap around you, bittersweet, smoky floral. There's rosemary in your sleeve, mint on your breath, and something unnameable rising from the stones. A promise, maybe? That even in the age of plague, someone still cares how things smell. The rain has passed. The sky has turned the dull color of pewter, a quiet, watchful hue that presses down on rooftops and leaves the cobbles slick underfoot. You follow the trail of burnt rosemary through the winding back alleys until you stumble upon something unexpectedly cheerful, a confectioner's cart. Well, former confectioner at least. The man behind it no longer sells sweets for pleasure. His hands, powdered with sugar and ash, move mechanically as he wraps small round pellets into paper twists. He's selling candied herbs now. Good for the chest, he mutters. Keeps the black breath at bay. You buy one. It's aniseed and mint hardened in syrup and dusted with cinnamon. When you suck on it, the flavor blossoms not unpleasant, really. Not medicinal exactly. It tastes like a festival trying to survive a funeral. It's a curious thing, this crossover between food and medicine. In plague times, that line blurred often. People believed that certain herbs, if not inhaled, could still protect you when eaten or drunk, and if they could taste good while doing it, even better. So, confectioners across Europe pivoted. Candied violets, aniseed balls, mint lozenges, rose petal preserves, and herbal syrups became plague-fighting tools disguised as treats. You stroll past another cart, this one selling plague pastilles, tiny sugar candies infused with dried herbs and spiced with clove. Prevents putrid breath, the sign boasts. You don't question whether that's medical or just marketing. Here's your fringe detail. Some recipes included powdered pearls, amber, and even gold leaf. Not for their flavor, of course, but because they were believed to possess purifying properties. Wealthy patients, it seems, wanted to be protected in style. You pass a small bakery and peek inside. The windows are soot-stained, and the shelves are empty, except for a tray of loaves sprinkled with caraway and dried thyme. A sign hangs on the wall, bread with healthful herbs, blessed by the Brothers of St. James. Another layer of ritual. In monasteries and abbeys, monks were baking herbal pastes into bread, blending rose water into wine, and soaking wafers in vinegar infused with mint or sage. Medicine and sacrament baked together. It wasn't just about healing the body. It was about signaling intention, eating something laced with hope. And you can't help but wonder, did the scent of mint wafting from a sweet help more than the sugar itself? Did the smell comfort more than the taste? The human brain associates scent with memory faster than it processes logic. Perhaps a candied clove was as close as some came to reassurance. Historians still discuss this blurry space where food medicine and ritual converge. One theory holds that plague-era diets changed dramatically, not because of nutrition, but because of aroma. People avoided foods with strong or corrupting smells: fish, eggs, cabbage, and leaned into dry, aromatic, fair-spiced biscuits, dried fruit, herb-stuffed pastries. Not because they were safer, but because they smelled safer. You find yourself near a narrow courtyard where a group of children sit cross-legged around a woman in a faded apron. She opens a paper cone and pours out small balls, sugar-glazed fennel seeds, tiny, shiny, and fragrant. She offers them around. "One each," she says, "and hold it in your cheek." The children obey. Their eyes are tired, their clothes patched. But they suck on the seeds quietly, and for a while no one coughs. Maybe that's the trick. Keep the mouth sweet, keep the fear back. You move on passing a household where someone's drying citrus peels over a fire. The scent is bright, refreshing a memory of summer markets now lost to the silence of plague. A man emerges with a tray of what he calls saint's breath pellets made of ginger sage and a kiss of honey. You try one. It burns just a little, and yet it works, at least in the way you need it to. These edible defenses weren't exclusive to Europe. Across the Islamic world, plague recipes included syrups made from quince vinegar, rose water, and sugar often sipped with meals or used as mouth rinses. In India, herbal tonics rich in mint, cardamom, and fennel were prescribed. Even in China, ancient texts referenced candies made from perfumed lotus root believed to cleanse the lungs. Different cultures. Same fear, same solution scent meets sugar. It's a bit tragic, really, that these little morsels, sweet, fragrant, delicate, had to carry such weight. That each bite was half defense, half desperate prayer. And sometimes they were the only part of the day that felt normal. You picture a plague doctor pausing between visits, sitting on a stone step, lifting the beak of his mask just enough to pop in a candied clove. He sucks on it quietly, letting the heat fill his mouth, trying to replace the stench of death with something spicy, clean, human. Then he lowers the mask and rises again. Tap, tap, tap. Back to work. You reach into your own pocket and find one of the pastilles still wrapped. You unwrap it, place it on your tongue. The flavor is sharp, sweet, strange. You can't tell if it's doing anything. But it reminds you that you're alive, and sometimes that's enough. The taste of the pastille lingers on your tongue, sugar dissolving slowly, herbs leaving behind a quiet fire. It's subtle, but it makes you feel a little steadier, a little more awake. You move through the market district now, the smell of mint following you like a thread stitched into your coat. Only it's not just your coat, it's everywhere. You begin to notice it in every doorway. Hanging from rafters, stuffed in cracks between shutters, dried bundles of sage and rose tied with string wedged into corners, jammed into drain pipes. Even the stray dogs sniffing their way through the streets seem to know these are not decorations. They are warnings. They are walls. People believe these herbs can stop the plague. It sounds naive today, but step into this moment with both feet, and it starts to make sense. You come upon a young man crouched on the cobbles, stuffing dried chamomile into tiny pouches made from scraps of old cloth. He's clearly exhausted, his face smudged with ash and sweat, but he ties each pouch carefully, methodically, like he's making miniature shields. "For my neighbors," he says without looking up. "They said I could trade them for eggs or bread, if there's any left." He offers you one. You accept. This time the scent is faint, weaker than the pastilles, less heady than the vinegar blends. But it's calming, like dried summer pressed between pages of a book. You walk on trying to make sense of it all, this near-religious devotion to scent, to herbs, to smell itself. Was there ever any real belief that scent acted as a barrier? Yes, absolutely. In the medieval mind, air wasn't neutral. It had weight, mood, temperament. Good air made you healthy. Bad air made you bleed from the eyes. You didn't just breathe air, you were shaped by it. And if you believed that bad air carried death, then surely good air could push it back. This is the heart of the miasma theory, a belief system so pervasive that it influenced public health for centuries. It wasn't a silly superstition. It was a worldview deeply rooted in Greek and Roman ideas of humoral balance, reinforced by Arabic medical texts, and repeated in university lectures across Europe for generations. So people leaned into it. Stuffing flowers into masks wasn't a cute affectation. It was an act of medicine, a technique, one that turned every breath into a prescription. It's easy to mock from the safety of germ theory and antibiotics, but remember, they were doing what they could with what they had in a world that smelled like rot and loss. And here's the ironic twist: sometimes it may have helped. Certain herbs used in plague masks, mint, lavender, rosemary, do contain compounds with mild antibacterial properties. Burning them, inhaling them, or rubbing them on your skin might have reduced your exposure to secondary infections, if not the plague itself. The doctors couldn't explain why it worked. But even a placebo has power when it feels like a shield. You turn into a narrow passageway where the walls lean so close they almost touch. A woman stands on a ladder tucking bundles of lemon balm into cracks in the stone. She nods at you. To keep the bad out, she says simply. You nod back. Historians still debate just how effective these measures were. Some claim they made no difference at all, mere distractions from deeper systemic failures. Others argue that by encouraging attention to air quality, cleanliness, and herbal hygiene, the practices may have indirectly slowed spread. One thing they all agree on: the belief itself changed behavior. That's not nothing. You reach a wider street where a man has written in chalk across his doorframe, "Sweet Air Safe House." Below the words you see small hanging pouches of crushed mint petals of rose and calendula, and oddly what looks like a slice of apple left to dry in the sun. The scent is patchy, earthy, still fighting, but you admire the optimism. Some people took it further, turning their homes into sensory battlegrounds. Potpourri was not decoration, it was defense. People rubbed herbs into walls, hung garlands of sage over cribs, stuffed mattresses with dried thyme. Some households even assigned someone, usually a child or elderly relative, to wave burning herbs through each room every few hours. You step inside an abandoned home where bundles of rosemary still hang like garlands from the rafters. The air is dusty now, but not stale. Someone worked hard here to keep it pure. Maybe they succeeded. Maybe they didn't. But they believed. Belief matters. And you can't help but notice the very idea of air had weight in this world. Air was mood. Air was spirit. And so scent became a way to touch it, to shape it, to turn invisible fear into something tangible and maybe survivable. You walk on holding your herb pouch, close its scent, now fading slightly. The petals inside are drying out. The mint's punch is dulled, but still it gives you a place to focus your breath, to remember that your lungs are working, that you're still here. And in this city of silence and shadows, that's no small thing. The street you now find yourself on winds gently uphill, its stones slick with rain and ash. It's quieter here, less about panic, more about performance. You're in the merchant district now, where those who could afford their own versions of safety once lived. And here, scent becomes something else entirely. You walk past shuttered windows decorated not with simple garlands or pouches of mint, but with pomander's glittering metal orbs dangling on silk ribbons carefully crafted and delicately scented. Some hang from door knockers. Others sit in open windowsills like gilded offerings to the gods of clean air. These aren't just tools of health, they're status symbols. Pomanders were all the rage among the wealthy. You've probably seen one in a museum, a small spherical container often made of gold, silver, or brass with intricate latticed holes to allow the scent inside to escape. But in plague times, they weren't just jewelry. They were portable air purifiers, personal bubbles of fragrance in a world of decay. You stop beside one, still turning slowly on its chain as if someone had only recently left it swinging. The scent that wafts from it is subtle, but distinct: roses, clove, maybe a whisper of myrrh. It smells expensive, calculated, like protection sold by the ounce. A merchant's wife would have worn hers at her waist near her skirts. A nobleman might keep his on a chain around his neck or tucked into a velvet pouch. Some carried multiple pomanders for different moods or environments. One for visiting the sick, one for banquets, one for the chapel. You wonder if they actually believed in them or if they simply hoped. Historians still argue over this. Some say pomanders were mostly decorative, like perfume bottles worn on the outside. Others insist that they were a serious part of one's health regimen. There are even documented cases where people added vinegar-soaked sponges, bits of ambergris, or even chunks of camphor wrapped in wax to intensify the protection. You reach a shop front with its sign still legible: fragrances and fine essences. Through the cracked windows, you can just make out tall shelves lined with vials. The labels are peeling, but you can guess what they once read: rose oil mint, extract, violet water, rosemary distillate. Some bottles remain upright. One has shattered its contents, long dried into a stain on the wood. This was an elite apothecary. And yes, there were levels to everything, even scent. While the poor clutched cloth bundles of dried weeds, the rich paid handsomely for distilled oils and rare spices. Frankincense imported from Arabia, nutmeg from the East Indies, orris root from Florence, all blended into fragrance mixtures with names like Plague Defender or Heir of the Saints. The irony? Sometimes they contain the exact same herbs, just fancier packaging. You pass a well-dressed skeleton slumped in a doorway, still wrapped in what looks like velvet. Around its neck hangs a long chain, and at the end of it, a delicate golden pomander. You step closer. Its lid is cracked open. Inside, dried petals cling to the edges, brown now, but you'd guess they were roses once. The scent is gone, but the gesture lingers. A few steps away, you notice a servant's quarters far less ornate. Hanging from a nail is a makeshift scent sachet, barely more than a handkerchief knotted with dried herbs. Lavender mostly, maybe some wormwood. A scrap of embroidery decorates the corner, probably stitched by hand. Different income, same fear. You lean against the wall, feeling the layers of scent peel apart in your memory. The sweet pastilles, the sharp vinegar blends, the warm smoke of burning rosemary. And now, this luxury scent as armor. Pomanders weren't the only scented objects floating through plague-stricken society. The pouncet box, a cousin to the pomander, was especially popular in England. It was a small perforated container filled with vinegar-soaked cotton or sponges infused with herbs. People would press them to their noses when passing through foul-smelling areas or when visiting the sick. One famous anecdote tells of Queen Elizabeth ordering a pouncet box be carried at court during outbreaks. It was passed discreetly between nobles, a quiet reminder that even royalty couldn't smell their way to safety. And then there were herbal gloves. Yes, gloves infused with fragrance. Some were rubbed with scented oils before wear, others were sewn with crushed herbs into the lining. Doctors sometimes wore these beneath their leather gloves. Nobles wore them to church. You even find a pair now lying atop a broken table inside a parlor, still vaguely shaped like hands, their seams stiff with age. You lift one gently. The scent is faint mint, definitely, and maybe lemon balm. You can't help but think how intimate these rituals were. To tie a scented sachet into a sleeve, to press a pomander to your nose before entering a room, to massage rose oil into your gloves. These weren't grand gestures. They were daily ones, habitual, almost affectionate, as though scent were not just medicine, but a companion. That might be the real key. People weren't just fighting off miasma. They were trying to preserve themselves, their routines, their senses, their dignity. In a world where the streets groaned with carts of the dead, a silver pomander was a whisper that said, "I am still here. I still choose to smell something beautiful." You take a last look at the merchant district as the wind shifts. Somewhere behind you, a bell tolls. Somewhere ahead, the faintest trail of mint catches on the air. You follow it, because where there is scent, there is someone still trying. You follow the breeze down a flight of mossy steps away from the merchant houses and into a humbler part of the city, where the stone walls sweat and the roofs lean like weary shoulders. The scent of mint fades here, replaced by something subtler: smoke, earth, and the quiet grit of survival. The buildings are tighter, the alleys narrower. Laundry still hangs from a line stretched between windows, though the wind has taken its color, and the sun has long forgotten it. And everywhere you look, people are working. Not loudly, not quickly, but with the kind of slow, deliberate energy you only see when the stakes are enormous. Here, scent isn't a matter of fashion. It's a matter of faith. You pass a stooped woman sitting on a stool outside her door, stringing together what looks like a necklace of garlic-dried roses and little tufts of wool soaked in vinegar. "Keeps the bad humors out," she mutters, not even glancing at you. She ties a final knot and hangs it beside her door like a charm. Further along, a young boy runs by with a smoky bundle clutched in his hands. Something is burning inside, and it trails a sharp, eye-watering scent of pine needles and damp sage. He waves it like a torch through the air, ducking in and out of doorways, shouting to no one in particular. Fresh air. Good air. Mama says it chases the plague rats off. You smile. It's hard not to admire their determination. Inside one of the houses, through a window cracked just wide enough to peek in, you spot a family sitting close together around a bowl of steaming water. Each takes turns leaning over it, breathing in deeply, heads covered with a shared cloth. You see sprigs of rosemary floating on the surface. Crushed mint clings to the steam. This is their aromatic steam bath, a poor man's spa, a rich man's last hope. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these makeshift remedies. Some say the steam treatments helped clear airways, providing temporary relief for those already sick. Others argue that crowding over the same bowl was a great way to spread illness. But what no one denies is the power of the ritual itself. Because this isn't just science, it's ceremony. And nowhere is that clearer than in what you see next. A small shrine has been set up at the end of the alley, just a wooden crate with a cloth draped over it, surrounded by bundles of herbs and dried petals. In the center, a single candle flickers. Around it sit jars of dried mint, rosemary, cloves, and something dark and waxy that might be myrrh. Above it, scratched into the wall with the tip of a knife, are 3 words, "Sweet Air Saves." You kneel beside it for a moment. No one else is there now, but clearly people visit. Offerings of dried fruit, a crust of bread, even a child's toy carved from wood have been left here. The candle burns steadily, its smoke twining with the scent of crushed herbs and creating a kind of sacred stillness. It's in these corners of the city that you realize smell was more than protection, it was a moral compass. In plague times, to stink was not only unpleasant, it was suspicious. People believed that bad smells marked you as dangerous, sinful, possibly even cursed. It wasn't just the body you were defending with rose and mint, it was your reputation. The poor were often blamed for the spread of disease, accused of uncleanliness and moral decay. Never mind that they had no access to perfume, no coin for fresh herbs, and lived 10 to a room over a chamber pot. They were still judged for the air that clung to them. Meanwhile, the wealthier classes perfumed themselves daily, not only to avoid the plague, but to broadcast virtue. Good air meant good health, good character, good breeding. A clean scent became shorthand for innocent. This was more than a class divide, it was a sensory hierarchy. Even the church got involved. Priests swung censers heavy with frankincense and myrrh, filling cathedrals with sweet smoke that blurred the lines between the sacred and the sanitary. Parishioners inhaled deeply during Mass, hoping the holy scent would shield their lungs as well as their souls. Incense became a divine air freshener, one that signaled both piety and protection. And here's a strange little tidbit: in some cities, confessionals were perfumed. Priests placed dried herbs near the openings, partly to guard themselves from contagion, but also to make the space feel holier. If your sins didn't reek, maybe they were easier to forgive. You rise from the alley shrine and continue walking. The smell of mint catches in the breeze again, faint but defiant, and you begin to see that people weren't just covering bad air. They were reclaiming it, turning the city into something livable again, one handful of crushed herbs at a time. You reach a small workshop where a group of women are assembling cloth bundles from leftover scraps. Each one is filled with dried lemon balm, crushed petals, and a drop of oil lavender if they have it. They're sewing them shut and stacking them neatly in baskets. For the midwives, one says, for the orphanage, and for the grave bearers. They don't stop working, they just nod when you pass. You've stopped wondering if the scent actually helps. That's not the point anymore. This is about comfort, continuity, dignity. In a world where death comes silently and without warning, mint and rose are a way to say, I was here. I tried. I made the air beautiful. You reach into your own pouch, now crushed and fading. You press it to your face and breathe in what's left. It's not much, but it's enough for one more step. You leave behind the alley's quiet shrine and the steady rhythm of needle and thread. The scent of crushed mint still clings faintly to your fingers. As you step into a busier square, it's clear that here, even in the heart of calamity, people are attempting something remarkable to reframe scent, not just as a defense, but as a declaration. You hear it before you see it. An old woman standing atop a crate holding a bundle of smoking herbs aloft like a torch. She chants rhythmically, waving the bundle toward the sky while a circle of neighbors watch in a hush. Rose and mint drive the dark air out. Sweet herbs keep the rot away. No one laughs. They join her. They raise their own tiny bundles, some just dried grass and lemon peel tied with string. Others more carefully assembled, and wave them in slow arcs, not in panic, but in choreography. It's not a spell. Not exactly. It's a moment. A communal act of resistance dressed in smoke and perfume. You stand at the edge of the crowd watching as scent becomes solidarity. All around the square, herbs dominate, hanging from windows, bundled in baskets, burned in clay dishes set on every doorstep. But what strikes you most is how intentional it all feels. This isn't superstition. It's structure, a community organized around the senses. And it makes sense. In a world without sirens or safety nets, scent is one of the few things you can control. You can't command the plague to leave your street, but you can pack mint into a pouch. You can burn sage at dawn. You can make your doorway smell like it belongs to the living. It's in this square that you learn about the scent watchers. In several cities, particularly in Italy and southern France, certain individuals, usually older women or herbalists, were appointed as official odor monitors. Their job was to detect illness through smell to declare a home suspect if the stench changed. These people walked through neighborhoods with bundles of herbs pressed to their noses, trained to recognize the difference between normal rot and the air of pestilence. It sounds strange now, like an old wives' tale institutionalized. But it happened, and some historians think it wasn't entirely without merit. Changes in body chemistry can affect breath, sweat, even the scent of a room. Whether they meant to or not, these scent watchers might have detected early symptoms before a doctor could even be summoned. You watch one now, an elderly man with a long woolen scarf tied tightly around his face, carefully sniffing his way along the edges of the square. He pauses now and then to adjust a cloth bundle in his hand. He doesn't speak, but people part to let him pass. They respect his role, maybe even fear it, because if he stops at your door, it means something has changed. And change in times like these is not a comfort. You step into a nearby house where someone has clearly prepared for the worst. The windows are shuttered, the door is bolted, but herbs hang from every beam and small bowls of vinegar rest beneath each sill. The air smells like a garden caught on fire. Not unpleasant, just intense, alive, as though the scent itself were standing guard. The back room reveals something even more elaborate, a scent map drawn on a wall in charcoal. It shows the nearby houses and streets with notes beside each: strong garlic, rosemary, faint, foul odor by the fountain. Someone is tracking the smells of the neighborhood like a general drawing a battle plan. You step back out and find that the square has changed. Now the herbalist from before is distributing bundles, one per person. Wave this when you pass the sick, she says. Not to insult them, to protect them too. It's a small but profound shift. People are no longer just masking their noses to avoid catching illness. They're using scent to protect others from their own breath. It reminds you of masks today, only this one smells like cloves and crushed citrus. You join the slow circle of movement, following the others. As they pass by the sick house, each person waving their bundle in slow, deliberate arcs. It's not ceremony. It's choreography born of necessity, a way to share air without sharing death. Historians often describe this period as one of collapse. But in moments like this, it feels more like adaptation, a new kind of order. A city restructured not by stone or steel, but by scent. And while there were countless theories, some crackpot, some strangely close to modern science, people understood at a gut level that smell was linked to health. Some doctors wrote detailed scent guides suggesting different herbs for different hours of the day: mint in the morning, rose at noon, lavender at dusk. Others instructed people to refresh the air by changing out their mask sachets regularly, or to burn herbs each hour on the hour. Entire daily rhythms were restructured around scent. You wonder if anyone actually kept to these regimens. But then you see an old man on his doorstep flipping over a bundle of mint in a shallow dish like clockwork. He's alone, but his posture is calm, focused. It's not magic, it's routine. And when the world's falling apart, routine might be the closest thing to a spell. You step into a shadowed alcove and lean against cool stone. You take out your own pouch again, nearly flattened now. The scent is weaker, fainter, but it's still there. A thread of mint, a whisper of rose. You breathe in and with it feel something anchor inside you. Not because you're safe, but because you've chosen how to breathe. And that choice, however small, still matters. You leave the square behind the slow ritual of bundled herbs and waving arms still drifting in your peripheral memory like smoke from a fading fire. The city begins to change again, broader streets now lined with larger homes and public buildings. And with that shift, something else emerges: the scent of institutional attempts at order. It hits you first outside what looks like a guild hall turned command center. A pair of guards stands at the entrance, face cloths, pulled tight sleeves soaked in something that smells like vinegar cloves, and maybe the lingering bite of lime rind. You nod to them and they don't answer. They're too busy watching the people entering one by one, each dabbing at their faces with soaked cloths handed to them in silence. You slip inside behind a merchant and the scent sharpens instantly. This is what happens when the state tries to regulate air. The hall is now a plague coordination center. At the far end of the room, behind a desk stacked high with lists and crude maps, a clerk distributes bundles of cloth soaked in a house-made anti-pestilence blend. You get one pressed into your hand without a word. It's sharp and acidic, pungent with vinegar, and infused with rosemary marjoram and what might be crushed orange peel. You hold it to your nose as instructed. Keep it there as long as you're inside, the clerk mutters. You do. Welcome to the great experiment of scent-based regulation. By this point in the plague's grip, many city councils across Europe had accepted that scent wasn't just personal, it was political. If the air carried disease and certain smells could fight it, then the government had a duty to control fragrance. And they tried in the only ways they knew how. Some cities passed ordinances requiring public scenting efforts. Rosemary and juniper were burned in open squares. Workers were hired to walk the streets waving censers. In one German town, church bells were accompanied not by hymns, but by the rhythmic clinking of herbal bundles hung from their ropes, so even sound was married to scent. Others went further. You find a document tacked to a pillar in the hall. It's a public health order written in elegant but nervous script. Let all homes be scented before noon. Let cloths be steeped in aromatic vinegar. Let rushes on floors be replaced every second day. Let mint and sage be hung above all entries. Let those who refuse be fined or removed. The people meant to enforce this are standing nearby apothecaries, conscripted into service, now wearing armbands that mark them as fumigators. You watch as one hands out packets of dried herbs wrapped in paper marked with the seal of the city council. It's official, bureaucratized, sanctioned scent. Historians still argue about whether these policies were effective or performative. One camp believes that the public scenting rituals created a sense of shared purpose like civic hygiene through olfactory means. Others say it was a case of misplaced effort, that the real threat, fleas and infected rats, was being ignored in favor of perfumed pageantry. But what's undeniable is that these efforts gave people something to do, and that doing something, even if based on flawed science, gave hope. You move down a corridor where charts are posted detailing zones of purity, areas recently fumigated, homes sealed and smoked with sage and vinegar, some marked in green, others in red. There's even a tally of how many pomanders were distributed that week, as though counting them might somehow offset the mounting death toll. One curious addition, a side room filled entirely with herbal storage. You step inside and find bins of mint, bundles of thyme, stacks of rose petals drying on cloth, and large amphorae filled with vinegar. It's a municipal perfume warehouse, air defense bottled and bundled. You pass a small chalkboard listing today's scenting schedule. Morning smoke, dried rosemary and pine needles. Midday steam vinegar, thyme, lemon balm. Evening fumigation, cloves, mint, and dried citrus peel. Every hour of the day accounted for, not by alarm bell but by aroma. And here's a fringe fact most people miss in some cities. Officials went as far as to ban certain smells. Tanners, butchers, and fishmongers were forced to work only outside city walls, or shut down entirely. The reasoning, their odors were believed to corrupt the air and make it easier for the plague to spread. You pass a poster declaring, "Let no dung be left in the street. Let no garlic rot in public. Let the air be kept clean lest corruption breed within it." It's almost poetic in a bureaucratic kind of way. You exit the building, stepping back into the now scented street. Someone has been burning herbal bundles in iron baskets attached to lampposts. You pause beneath one. The air is warmer here, fragrant, faintly hopeful, almost like the city is breathing back. And yet even amid this order, the human instinct returns. You spot a woman on her balcony, holding a pouch of dried petals close to her heart. It's not part of a schedule, not part of an ordinance. It's her moment, her breath, her little rebellion. You look back at the council building behind you, its rules, its rotas, its charts, and realize something. They tried to control scent. But scent always belonged to the people. You pull out your own pouch again now, lighter, nearly empty. You shake it gently. A few dried flakes of mint flutter inside, still enough for one more breath. You inhale, and this time it's not just habit, it's defiance. You drift away from the council, building its scent of vinegar and rosemary fading like old incense behind you. The streets are quieter here again, bending toward the edge of the city where farms once fed the marketplace, and fresh air once taken for granted used to roll in without a second thought. But that was before the plague made every breath feel like a gamble. As you walk along the city's perimeter wall, you notice a curious thing: bundles of herbs tied to every single stone marker. Some are neat, tied with twine and pressed with care. Others are messy fistfuls crammed into cracks and corners: lavender, mint, wild thyme, even daisies. It's as if the city has created a second border, not of stone, but of scent. And this is no accident. You've entered what historians call the buffer zone, the physical and psychological perimeter between the infected core and the cleaner air beyond. People believed that scent could act as a kind of airlock, purifying the breath as it passed from one space to another. This idea led to one of the more creative and frankly theatrical medieval public health responses: herb-lined city gates. You approach one now, a low-arched gate through which carts once entered, carrying grain and firewood. Now it's a checkpoint. Guards in thick gloves wave you forward while others soak cloths in buckets of perfumed vinegar and press them against the wooden beams. You're told to pause and hold your herb pouch to your nose. Then, and only then, are you allowed through. As you cross the threshold, you notice the smell changes. Fresher, yes. Cleaner. Someone has scattered bundles of lemon balm and mint on the ground. Chickens scratch through the remains. A donkey tied to a post munches lazily on rosemary sprigs. Nature, it seems, has joined the ritual. This was common in plague-struck cities. The edges became inhalation zones, places where people came not just for safety, but for air that smelled like not dying. Officials sometimes stationed scent vendors at the gates. You could buy a pouch of freshly dried sage or inhale from a steaming basin for a few coins before heading back inside. One quirky account from Milan tells of a man who set up a booth just outside the walls offering fresh air by the sip. His service? A hollow reed stuck into a sealed jug filled with perfumed herbs. You paid, you took a deep breath through the reed, and you moved on, medically unproven, economically brilliant. You walk a little further, reaching a farmstead that has clearly become a halfway refuge. A sign on the gate reads, "Fresh quarters, for healthy only." But no one guards it now. The field is still. Inside you find scattered bedding, a fire pit lined with fragrant rushes and bundles of drying herbs strung between fence posts like forgotten festival banners. You pick one, a braid of mint and marigold. Even now, days or weeks after it was placed there, the scent lingers. And then it hits you, perhaps the most subtle, most powerful role of all that mint rose and rosemary has played in this strange, scented war: memory. You sit by the fence and breathe it in. Not deeply, not desperately, just enough. You close your eyes, and for a moment you're not in a dying city. You're in a market laughing, in a kitchen stirring a pot of stew, in a garden crushing leaves between your fingers just to smell them. Scent binds you to the world that was, to a time before the plague made the air feel like an enemy. Historians still debate whether that mattered medically. Did scented thresholds, perfumed gates, and inhalation rituals actually reduce transmission? Who knows? But emotionally, spiritually, socially, they mattered immensely. The plague didn't just infect lungs, it erased structure, and scent offered people a way to build a new one you could smell, one you could control, one that let you tell yourself, "I've crossed from danger into safety because the air smells sweet again." You pass a crude chapel built of rough stone, clearly a temporary structure. Inside, someone has arranged clay pots filled with crushed herbs. They sit where holy water would once be. There's a note scrawled in crooked handwriting. Dip your hands in the scent, not the water. Breathe not because you're safe, but because you still can. You do. You press your fingers into the crushed mint and rosemary. The scent clings to your skin like memory, like prayer. Outside again, the wind picks up. The city looms behind you, heavy with silence and smoke. Ahead, the open fields ripple with unharvested wheat, and even here, bundles of herbs hang from fence rails like sentinels. It's strange, isn't it? The way people turned breathing into a ritual. How scent became not just a tool, but a language. Each crushed petal said, "I remember what clean air was." Each sprig of mint whispered, "I choose to live one breath at a time." And each rose, tucked into a mask, reminded the world, "I will not let the stink of death have the last word." You rest your head back against the gatepost. The sun breaks through the clouds for the first time all day. It glints off the dew-covered petals still tied above the archway. And for a breathless moment, the air feels whole. You leave the chapel slowly, your fingers still tingling with the residue of crushed herbs. It's not a feeling you can describe easily. It's part memory, part hope, and something else, something heavier. The scent follows you, lingering in the folds of your sleeves, in the curve beneath your nose, as if it's trying to anchor you to this place where survival and symbolism blend like tinctures in a jar. As you re-enter the outer lanes of the city, your attention shifts not to the living but to the dead. Because in the end, scent did not only accompany the fearful, it followed the fallen. You arrive at a field beyond the eastern wall. It isn't marked as a cemetery, but it functions like one. Shallow mounds of earth rise from the ground like bruises, cloth-wrapped bundles, a few wooden crosses. No names, only silence. But scattered across the uneven rows are more of those now familiar objects, bundles of herbs, pouches tied to sticks, even small clay bowls holding hardened lumps of what was once perfumed oil. Yes, even the dead were scented. You kneel near a particularly well-tended grave. At its base, someone has pressed fresh rosemary and a single dried rose into the dirt. It's not for preservation. It's not for hygiene. It's a final kindness. People believed the dead could still pollute the air, that the breathless body could leak pestilence back into the living world. So corpses were wrapped in scented cloths, their shrouds soaked in vinegar and oil. The more devout added rosewater, frankincense, or powdered myrrh, tracing their loved ones' final moments with fragrance. It was part reverence, part protection. You rise and walk toward a cluster of burial workers in the distance. Their job is endless now. Cart, wrap, cover, mark, repeat. But they don't work like machines. You see one pause to adjust a garland on a makeshift cross. Another reaches into a leather pouch and sprinkles something cloves maybe into an open grave. It's a grim choreography, but it's deeply human. These laborers too wear their own herbal protections. Some tuck mint behind their ears, others chew it, grimacing. One man wears a sprig of dried rose tied into the brim of his hat, not because it works, not because it saves, but because it says, "I am still a person, even in this." Historians still argue whether these rituals were practical or performative. Did rose petals and vinegar-soaked shrouds actually stop disease from spreading from corpse to caretaker? The science leans toward no, but the ritual helped. Because death in the age of plague wasn't just final, it was fast, lonely, and often anonymous. Scents offered a way to reclaim the personal, to say, this was someone I loved. They deserve more than silence and a shovel. And in that context, the herbs did something vital. They softened the edge. You follow the path toward the base of a hill where the city's poorest were buried. There are fewer bundles here, just a few cloth tokens, scraps of dried grass. But even here, even now, someone has tied wild mint to the base of a stick marker. It's rough, imperfect, but it's something. You stop and close your eyes. The air carries the scent of smoke and earth, but underneath it, underneath the grief, you still find mint, still find rose, still find the breath of resistance. You think back on everything this journey has shown you. The plague mask, the herbs, the markets filled with pouches and pastilles, the people who burned rosemary at dawn, the children who clutched flower bundles to their chests, the council offices lined with rules and the shrines scrawled with prayers. It wasn't about medicine alone. It was about meaning. You walk down the hill and find yourself in a shaded grove where no graves have yet reached. Here someone has built something unusual, a scent garden, small and simple, no statues, no benches, just rows of rosemary, lavender, thyme, and mint growing in neat lines between stakes. There's no plaque, no instructions, just a woven basket by the entrance and a note etched on slate. Take only what you need, breathe gently, leave a sprig for someone else. You reach down and pluck a single mint leaf. It crumbles easily between your fingers, but the scent releases in full, sharp, cool, clean. You press it to your nose and inhale. In this moment, there is no plague, no death bell, no shrouded cart. There is only air you chose to breathe. You leave the grove carrying nothing but that trace of mint on your hands. And in that scent you carry centuries of human hope, fear, ritual, and resistance. Because when the world fell silent, roses still bloomed, mint still grew, and breath, no matter how uncertain, still meant you were alive. You walk now with slower steps, the last sprig of mint still pressed gently between your fingertips. The city behind you breathes in shadows, while ahead the path turns soft and earthen again, lined with tall grass and dandelions that sway like metronomes in a lullaby. You've nearly reached the end of your strange, fragrant journey. But there's one final place calling you, a modest chapel on a rise overlooking the city, weather-beaten and quiet, with its doors open wide as if it's been waiting. You step inside. The chapel is empty except for a single figure kneeling at the front, lighting small clay oil lamps filled not with wax, but herbs suspended in oil. One by one they flicker to life: rosemary, mint, lavender, thyme. The room fills slowly with scent, not cloying, not forced, just present. The kind of scent that doesn't ask to be noticed but insists on being remembered. This is no ordinary sanctuary. This is the final chapter of a world scented into memory. The walls are bare, but here and there herbs hang like rosaries. Instead of incense smoke, the air carries the clean hush of living plants and dried bouquets. Instead of gold, there's beeswax. Instead of sermons, there is silence, and silence says more. You sit in one of the old pews, and beside you lies a worn book. Not a Bible, but a ledger. It's filled with names and herbs. Elena, rose clove. Marta, mint wormwood. Brother Paul, sage myrtle oil. Not a list of deaths, a list of scents, chosen by or for each soul. The way you might remember someone by the way their coat smelled in winter, or the way their hands carried lavender after a bath. It's a book of olfactory eulogies. One leaf per life. No epitaphs, only aromas. You add your name. You don't even hesitate. You mint rose ash. You set the book back on the bench. The figure at the front rises, their lamplighting finished. They nod gently to you as though you've always been expected. And then they exit, leaving you alone in a room that seems to hum softly, not from noise, but from memory, woven into air. Historians often treat the plague with numbers, bodies, outbreaks, dates, graphs. They calculate the toll. They compare strains. They document the collapse of cities and the rebirth of medicine. But there's a thing they can't quite chart. They can't chart how the air changed, how people made meaning in breath, how every herb became a whispered resistance, how scent became survival's lullaby. That's the part no graph shows. But it's the part you'll remember. And now, after 20 sections of walking through plague-ridden alleys, open-air markets, fumigation wards, and flower-drenched altars, we reach the end. You step outside the chapel just as twilight falls across the city like a soft quilt. The rooftops glow faintly, and for a moment even the sky smells cleaner. You pull your pouch from your coat. It's crumpled now, just threadbare cloth and a few stubborn flakes of mint. You could toss it, leave it at the chapel door, but you don't. You tighten the string and slip it back into your pocket like a quiet promise you intend to keep. You may never need it again, but it has walked with you. It has held your breath when the world felt too loud. And so as the bells chime gently from the distance, no longer a death toll but something more like a lullaby, you take one last inhale. You let it settle behind your eyes, in the back of your throat. Mint, rose, and something that might be peace. You walk now along a narrow path that leads down from the chapel and winds beside a trickling stream, barely more than a ribbon of silver running through the tall grass. The city is a silhouette behind you, its steeples and towers softened by dusk, no longer sharp against the sky, but folded gently into it. The scent of rosemary still clings to your clothes, and the wind carries the faintest trace of mint from the chapel. There's no one here, but you're not alone. All around you, the landscape seems to breathe with stories that don't speak in words. A bundle of dried herbs left at a fence post, a small pouch nailed to a wooden gate. These are memorials not marked by marble or chisel, but by scent fragments of lives remembered not by inscription, but by aroma. You step onto a wooden footbridge, worn smooth by the footsteps of a city that once tried everything to outbreathe death. Beneath your feet, the stream gurgles as it slips over pebbles, and just ahead you see a young man sitting with his back to a tree. He's carving something small and careful from wood, a hollow sphere, lattice-shaped, a pomander. He glances at you and smiles faintly. Rose petals, he says, holding it out, and lemon balm. Not much else left these days. You thank him and take it gently. It's still raw, the carving uneven, but you press it to your face anyway. The scent is subtle, faint sweetness, a citrus whisper, and something older. Something like dust and memory. You ask who it's for. He shrugs. Anyone, he says, everyone. Because scent by now has become a public language. You walk on, leaving him and his carving knife behind. The path rises gently through a field where wild herbs grow freely, untamed mint sprawling thyme blue-gray sage with leaves like velvet. No hands have planted them. No one tends this garden. But here they are growing anyway, like breath, like grief, like hope. Historians speak often of the architecture of plague, the quarantine zones, the barricaded houses, the charnel pits. But rarely do they speak of the aromatic architecture, the way scent shaped space. Rooms burned with rosemary became sick rooms. Doorways hung with mint became boundaries. A bowl of petals became a ritual. And masks. Masks were not just for the face. They were for the soul. They held more than herbs. They held intention. A reminder to inhale purposefully, to face horror with the breath of a garden on your lips. You pause at the edge of the field looking back at the road you've walked. You remember the child with the flower-stuffed satchel, the old man turning bundles on his doorstep, the shrine etched with sweet air saves, each of them clinging not just to life, but to something quieter, something richer, a world where breath still belonged to the living. One last thought occurs to you as night deepens and the first stars begin to blink into view. Scent is the only sense that goes straight to the memory center of the brain. No detours, no translations. One sniff of mint and you are there in a kitchen, a garden, a childhood spring. No wonder they used it. No wonder they trusted it. When everything else was unrecognizable, scent was the shortcut home. You kneel by the roadside and gather a handful of fresh rosemary. You crush it between your palms, the scent rising sharp and earthy, not for protection, not for performance, just for remembrance. Because tonight, and maybe always, the air remembers better than any book. And when the history fades and the names blur and the dates grow soft, the mint will still grow wild, the roses will still bloom, and someone somewhere will still pause at a scent and remember that we once fought with flowers. The moon has risen now, and the world around you is washed in silver. Shadows stretch long, soft-edged, and gentle over the hills. You follow a trail worn into the earth by generations of feet, merchants, monks, mourners. Tonight it is only you, but the air around you is still thick with company even if invisible. You approach a cluster of cottages nestled at the foot of the hill. Most are dark, shuttered tight, but one has a light glowing faintly behind a curtain of oiled cloth. You knock once and enter, when the door creaks open. Inside it smells of everything you've been tracing: cloves and beeswax, dry lavender, and fresh mint, and something simmering low in a pot that reminds you of lemon rind and thyme. The room is humble, a cot, a chair, a shelf crowded with jars, but it is filled with presents. You're greeted not with words, but a nod, and then an open hand offering you a small square of cloth, folded into a bundle. You open it. Inside mint rose and a sprig of mugwort. You're in the home of an old healer. She moves slowly, wrapping more bundles. Each has a name pinned to it, stitched directly into the cloth. Some are for the living. Others, you sense, are not. As she works, she hums, not a song you recognize, but something melodic and wordless. A lullaby for herbs, a rhythm for remembering, a tune for breath. It's here that you notice something else: layers of scent, not just fragrance. Generations. Some of the jars date back decades. You pull one gently from the shelf and read the inscription, "For the fever wind, Elena 1323. This was never about one plague. It was always about many. The Black Death was only the most famous. Others came and went: smallpox, sweat sickness, influenza, ague. And every time people turned again to their bundles and oils and masks and fields, not because they thought it would cure the world, but because it made life bearable inside it." The healer finally speaks. "They called it superstition," she says, "when I was a girl. But we weren't trying to stop death. We were trying to remember something that death couldn't take." She hands you a cloth, and for a moment it feels like taking an oath. Outside again, the night is quieter than it has any right to be. You walk along the edge of a stone wall draped with overgrown ivy and find tucked into the mortar more bundles, more names. Some are fresh. Others have faded, their herbs crumbled to dust. But they were left with intention, as markers, as whispers. You realize now that even if the plague doctors with their beaked masks had vanished, the people never stopped scenting their fear. In a way, they became plague doctors themselves. Each citizen, each family, each child with a dried mint sachet tied around their neck, they carried the practice forward. Not in robes or leather, but in linen and memory, in vinegar on the doorframe, in clove oil behind the ears. And here's a fascinating debate. Some modern scholars argue that plague culture created the first popular awareness of sensory health, that the link between scent and survival laid the groundwork for later understandings of air hygiene and even public wellness. It makes sense. When the nose becomes the guardian of the body, the world starts to arrange itself differently. The smell of clean clothes, the smell of bread, the smell of unburnt air, all became signals, emotional facts, and if the air smelled wrong, you knew before your body did. You pass a bakery with its shutters closed, a faint trail of flour dust still lingering beneath the door. Someone's tied a pouch to the handle, dried basil perhaps. You stop, press your herb bundle to your nose, and breathe in alongside it. For just a second, the two scents layer together like a memory trying to harmonize. You continue your walk and the air grows colder. But you're not uncomfortable. You're carrying your own weather now, your own rules. The scent of rose and mint has become a map guiding you not just through space but through thought. Each breath is a choice to stay present. Each step is a memory stitched into air. You pass an orchard where the trees are wild and unpruned. Between their roots you spot a clay pot half buried with fresh herbs inside. A single note written on a scrap of fabric reads, "For breath, for sleep, for silence." You sit beside it. You add a pinch from your own pouch. And you don't say anything, because this has never been a story about words. It has always been about breath. And tonight, as you inhale the mingled perfume of ancient fear and ordinary hope, you understand that those plague doctors weren't just fighting disease. They were holding the line between life and forgetting. One rose petal at a time. The stars above you glint like tiny watchful eyes as you rise from the orchard floor. Your back is stiff from sitting too long, your hands slightly scented from where you rested them in the herb pot. The clay was warm as if it remembered the sun. The air smells like crushed rosemary, sweet decay, and earth. And in that moment, you realize this journey through scent isn't just a stroll through history. It's a pilgrimage. You make your way toward the outskirts again, this time to an old priory that once housed both monks and plague patients. It's mostly ruin now. Roof collapsed. Vines overtaking the nave. But parts still stand. The cloisters are intact, and so is a small apothecary garden hidden behind a wall of ivy and half-toppled stones. You push through the vines, and there it is, an overgrown square of raised beds, each one labeled by hand in faded Latin salvia. Rosmarinus, mentha, funiculum. The monks once grew healing herbs here not for medicine alone, but for balance. They believed scent could anchor the soul, that a person grieving or sick or mad could be pulled back to themselves by the scent of the right plant. It wasn't science. It was spiritual architecture. You kneel at the sage bed and brush your fingers along the stalks. The scent rises dry and powerful, like parchment soaked in wind. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime made of iron spoons stirs softly, reminding you that even ruins can still sing. There's a small stone bench in the far corner, and when you sit, you notice a row of hand-carved masks set on the shelf behind it, simple wood shaped roughly into the curved beaks once worn by plague doctors. But these aren't ceremonial. They're unfinished. Someone carved them recently. The wood still smells fresh. A few have bundles of herbs tied inside clove myrrh crushed mint. You pick one up. It's rough, unpainted, a whisper of a design. But holding it to your face, you're surprised how easily the scent fills the space between you and the world. The plague doctor mask wasn't just a costume of dread, it was a filter for fear, a boundary, a declaration that said, I choose to walk into danger, but I do it with a rose in my nose. You smile under the wooden beak, and then you set it gently back down. Because this journey has never been about dressing like the past, it's about breathing with it. You wander through the ruins, the air thick with green smells, wild parsley, and nettles overripe berries crushed into the path. You find a collapsed wall, and on its exposed brick is scratched a poem. Let air be bright, though breath be grim. Let petals soften edges dim. For though we cough and though we cry, we scent our way, and so we try. There are no initials, no date. But someone stood here with a sharp stone in hand and carved that message for the next soul to find. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they had lost someone. Maybe they were the last one left in this ruin. But even then, they wrote not a warning but a hope. You pause at a water trough, its stone sides chipped by time. Someone's left a floating bundle of herbs inside tied with silk. The water smells faintly of lemon balm and thyme. You scoop up a palmful and press it to your cheeks. It cools, your skin tingles softly, as if the past is offering you a washcloth and whispering you've made it this far. Historians have long puzzled over the persistence of herbal practice during plague times. Even as cities tried quarantine and fumigation, and as doctors turned toward anatomy and contagion theory, people kept scenting their spaces. Not because they thought it would cure them, but because it was the last comfort they had control over. And control, however small, was precious. You remember a fringe fact: now some apothecaries refuse to sell scent bundles to the rich exclusively. They created common pots, herbal mixtures for anyone to take from no matter their coin. They believed scent was a right. That clean air was a mercy, not a luxury. You rise and leave the priory ruins behind. The wind tugs your sleeves and you tighten your coat around you. Somewhere nearby a fox yips. A few crows flap low overhead. But you're not afraid. The scent at your collarbone reminds you this journey is still yours. You reach into your pouch again. The herbs inside are dry now, nearly spent. But they've traveled far with you. They've crossed wards and alleyways, graves and gardens, ruins and rituals. And tonight they remind you of the simplest, strangest truth of all, that when the world is too big to fix, you can still hold something close. Crush a leaf, inhale deeply, and keep walking. The path ahead narrows as you leave the priory ruins behind, winding between hedgerows that spill over, with wild chamomile and creeping thyme. A thin mist begins to form along the edges of the grass, curling around your boots like quiet fingers. But it's not the cold kind of mist. It smells faintly floral, like it borrowed its scent from the earth itself. You keep walking, not because you must, but because there's still more to remember. Eventually you reach a crossroad marked by a low wooden post. Someone has carved symbols into it, rough flowers, stars, and something that looks like a swirling gust of wind. There's no text, but it's clear this is a marker of breath, a place where someone once stood and said, "Here, inhale, and move forward. Hail." And you do. Just past the marker lies a small homestead long abandoned. The thatch has rotted and the garden has gone to seed, but something catches your eye: a row of little bundles still tied to the rafters of the porch. They're old, brittle. The cloth faded to pale cream, but inside them still the scent. Faint, but real. Clove, sage, and rose. You kneel and breathe it in, and for a moment it's like opening a door. This house once belonged to someone who believed in air as memory. You can almost see them, an older woman perhaps, boiling water on the hearth, stirring in petals from the garden. Maybe her children helped tie bundles. Maybe her husband collected mint on his way home. Maybe this porch was their border between fear and familiarity. And now you sit in their space, breathing their breath. You move to the garden next. The rows are tangled but not dead. Lemon balm fights for space with stinging nettle. A small wild rose bush has somehow thrived and pushes stubbornly against the fence. It's blooming. Of course it is. You pause to think about how roses became a symbol of plague. Most people know the rhyme "ring around the rosy." Often misattributed, debated, misunderstood, but it persists. Roses became shorthand for both life and warning. A bloom too full might mean infection. A petal too dark might suggest rot. But even so, they were never cast away. They were woven into the story. Historians argue over whether the rhyme really came from plague times. Some say it's Victorian fantasy. Others swear by earlier oral versions. But the rose endures, because it had to. The rose said there is still beauty. The mint said there is still breath. The clove said there is still strength. You wander to a collapsed sidewall, and beside it a small wooden box remains half buried in the earth. You open it carefully. Inside, dried herbs layered like sediment, each one labeled with thin scraps of vellum. Calming one reads, "For sleep," says another, and one is simply marked, "For remembering." That's the one you take. It smells like something between rosemary and grief. You sit by the garden's edge where the fence has fallen and watch the mist begin to creep toward the trees. For a long time, you do nothing. Just sit. Just breathe. Because that's the one act that has held everything else together. Breathing isn't passive in a plague. It's resistance. It's a political act, a spiritual one, A promise to your own chest that you will keep moving, keep smelling, keep living, even if all you can smell is time crushed underfoot. You finally rise and continue walking, this time toward the edge of a forest. The trees here are dark and tall, but not frightening. They stand like sentinels, and in their branches bundles of herbs have been hung like wind chimes, some tied with twine, others woven into loops. The air smells thick here, almost holy. And it hits you. These woods have been scent claimed. Someone, maybe a group, made these trees into a threshold, a barrier, or a portal, depending on how you breathe it. A fringe theory. You remember. In some places, communities treated sacred groves like decontamination zones. Not scientific, not enforced, but symbolic. You passed through the grove to shed your fear. You inhaled at the forest's edge to clean your thoughts. It didn't work on bacteria, but it worked. You walk beneath the trees now, feeling the softness of moss underfoot. Every few feet the scent changes. Some bundles are lavender heavy. Others carry an edge of bitter wormwood. There's no pattern, only intention. And through the gaps in the trees you see lanterns, hanging from branches, each one lit, each one faintly perfumed. A vigil made not of flame alone, but of breath. You don't speak. You don't need to. Because this is the part of the plague story that rarely gets told, the way people built sanctuaries of smell. Not hospitals, not clinics, but spaces where your lungs were reminded that life was still possible, where every breath was a prayer and every herb was a psalm. You sit beneath the nearest lantern, you press the remembering herb to your nose, and you exhale, not to let something go, but to make room for everything that's been carried. You sit beneath that perfumed lantern for a long time, letting the layers of scent unfold like a story told in silence. First, the rosemary sharp and clean, like the snap of linen in wind. Then, the soft rise of rose, a sweetness not sugary, but somber. And behind it all, something else, the earthy undertone of time, grounding everything like an old memory pulled from the soil. When you finally stand, your limbs feel slower, your mind a little quieter. You move deeper into the grove, where the lanterns thin out and give way to bundles of herbs left directly on the forest floor. No posts, no symbols, just careful offerings, tied with ribbons, wrapped in leaves, weighted with stones to keep them from blowing away. You're not the first to walk this way, and you won't be the last. The path curves again, and you find yourself approaching a clearing. In the center stands a large wooden structure, a frame of beams supporting an open roof, almost like a pavilion. At first it seems abandoned, but when you step inside you realize what it is: a scent archive. Bundles of herbs hang in rows from the beams, each one labeled with a wooden tag. The air is thick but not cloying, it moves like music, each inhale a different chord. Clove and lemon balm, lavender and ash, mugwort and myrtle. Every combination is a memory formula. You walk slowly between the rows, brushing your fingers against a tag that reads, "For the night when we lost her." Another to smell her favorite morning again. And another nearly faded for the baby who didn't get to breathe. You stop. You let your eyes close, and you breathe it all in. Historians might dismiss a place like this as apocryphal. No one would write about it in plague records. There's no tax ledgers for emotion, no census for sorrow. But this is what the written history missed: how scent became a personal archive in an era without photographs, without recordings, without keepsakes that could survive fire or flood. People scented their love, their loss, their hope. You reach into your pocket and pull out your herb pouch. It's smaller now, flattened. You untie the string and place the remnants, rose mint, the soft crumble of for remembering, into a shallow wooden bowl resting near a bundle marked "For strangers who came too late." You are neither early nor late. You are simply here. And you realize now that this entire journey has not just been about plague or panic or masks or medicine. It has been about the inheritance of intention, the way people turned one of the most basic functions of being alive, breathing, into a sacred act. That's the secret no plague doctor ever wrote down, that the herbs weren't just for protection. They were for presence. You step out of the archive and make your way toward a winding trail that leads out of the woods. The moon is higher now, spilling silver over everything. The trees whisper above you, not with wind, but with meaning. At the bend in the trail, you find a small wooden bench beside a trickling stream. Someone has left a fresh bundle of mint and violet beside it, tied with dark green string. A note is pinned to the bench's side. Sit, inhale. If you've made it this far, you already know how to keep going. So you sit, and you do exactly what it says. You breathe. You let the scent wash through you like a tide. Not just mint and violet, but everything you've carried. The vinegar smoke of the council chambers, the funeral herbs at the burial fields, the bundles in market stalls, the pomanders carved by hand, the whispered rituals in alleyways and ruins and dreams. And as you sit, something stirs deep in your chest. A kind of rest, a kind of trust. You're not here to fix anything. You're here to witness it, to breathe with it, to carry the air forward. You rise at last and continue down the trail, the bench fading behind you like the final line of a prayer. One step at a time, one breath at a time, one scent at a time. The path leads you gently out of the woods, your feet now crunching on gravel instead of moss. The change in ground texture somehow makes each step feel more real, more present. You've emerged from a world that hummed with quiet ritual into one that feels like a soft return to the ordinary. But even now, the scent of violet and mint still lingers on your hands, on the folds of your clothes, as if the woods refused to let you leave without something to carry. Ahead lies a small village, mostly quiet, mostly asleep. You walk slowly through the lanes where cottages lean on each other like old friends, and you notice on every windowsill, every door latch, every porch rail, small bundles of dried herbs tied neatly with twine. Some are elaborate, packed with rosemary, lavender, and lemon peel. Others are humble, just sprigs of mint or bay leaf held together with whatever thread was on hand. These aren't just for show. This is a community of breath. Each bundle whispers a little message into the night: we are still here, we are still trying, we are still breathing. You pass a notice board where other towns might post prices for flour or announcements of weddings. But here it's a scent exchange. Notes are pinned with clothespins and wax seals. Some are instructions, recipes for calming blends, immunity bundles, or sleeping sachets. Others are requests. Does anyone have fresh thyme? My daughter's breath is tight again. Offering rose oil in exchange for good clove. Trade sage vinegar for dried marjoram. Leave by the gate. It's barter not in gold, but in aroma. You sit on the edge of a stone fountain at the village center, where the water smells faintly herbal. Someone's added crushed fennel and mint, maybe even a drop of lavender oil. You dip your hands in. It's cool, and the scent rises with the mist. This isn't superstition anymore. This is infrastructure. You glance at the edge of the fountain where someone has scratched a phrase in soft, sloping script. Air is shared. Make it kind. It stays with you. You continue walking until you reach what used to be a schoolhouse. The building has been repurposed, curtains made from old linens, the windows open to the breeze. Inside, rows of simple beds have been arranged, makeshift cots for the sick, or for travelers like yourself. A few are occupied sleepers, breathing slowly, bundles of herbs pinned to their blankets like talismans. At the far end, a quiet caretaker moves from bed to bed, refreshing the pouches with new leaves. She doesn't notice you at first, but when she does, she offers a tired smile and points to a small basket. It's filled with new herb bundles, free to take. You choose one. It's filled with angelica, mint, and clove. You've never smelled anything quite like it. Earthy, sharp, with a citrus brightness that makes you sit a little straighter. As you settle into one of the unoccupied cots, you notice something pinned above every bed, not just names, but breath maps. Simple diagrams showing the herbs each person finds most calming or strongest or meaningful. Some are hand-drawn, others stitched. Yours will be empty for now. But you place your bundle at your side, and you feel it, that odd sense of being tucked into something ancient and essential. This isn't just shelter. This is scented safety. Historians don't often record this kind of thing. They write of plagues in terms of waves and symptoms and deaths. But here in this little room where people still breathe with herbs tied to their pillows, you see the part they miss. The community choreography of survival. One person grows mint, one dries it, one ties the bundles, one distributes, one teaches the children how to recognize it by smell. And in doing so, every inhale becomes an act of connection, of trust, of continuity. You close your eyes for a while. Outside, the wind shifts and the smell changes slightly. Someone must have burned rosemary nearby. It curls through the open windows like a lullaby. And in that breath, you find something close to rest. Not because you've arrived, but because you've been invited. You think of the beaked masks again, not as horrors, but as symbols. Of people who dared to keep walking forward even when every step was taken through air that could not be trusted. People who filled the gap between danger and dignity with rose petals and mint leaves. You take one last deep breath through your bundle. The angelica hits your chest like a distant memory of safety. And for the first time since this journey began, you don't feel like you're running from something. You feel like you're breathing with it. When you wake, it's still dark. Not the black, suffocating dark of stormed-up shutters or death bells in the distance, no. This is the soft kind, a gentle pre-dawn hush that holds its breath before the world begins again. You sit up slowly in the cot. The herb bundle you held overnight has left a faint imprint on your skin, a quiet perfume still lingering on your hands. The room is quieter than before. A few sleepers stir beneath their blankets, one mumbling softly in a dream. You rise careful not to make a sound and step out into the lane. The village smells like dreams. It's the mint again carried on the night air from somewhere nearby. Someone's burning cedar wood and clove, too. You can tell by the smoky sweetness weaving its way through the chimney tops. It smells less like fear now and more like something sacred, the scent of people who survived another night. You follow it down a gentle slope toward a cluster of trees lit by hanging lanterns. This is the village drying yard, a place for hanging herbs, linens, hopes. Wooden racks line the open air, and cloth bundles swing lightly in the breeze. No one is here, but the place feels watched over, as if it remembers the hands that hung each piece. You walk through slowly, inhaling as you go. Mint, sage, bay leaf, juniper, and then rose again. You pause beneath one rack where someone has strung a full garland of dried roses. Not fresh, not fancy, just careful. Each bloom tied with red twine and spaced apart with small knots of lavender and lemon peel. The effect is subtle but powerful. This is not a garland of mourning. This is a garland of breath. You remember one curious fact from an old manuscript. Some plague communities believed that rose petals could catch evil spirits in the air. They weren't burned. They weren't eaten. They were witnesses. Quiet guardians placed on windowsills, tucked into hems, or strung like these across open air to absorb whatever darkness dared to pass. You reach up and touch one. It crumbles softly between your fingers, but the scent is still there, still present, still alive. The sky begins to lighten with the softest tint of blue, and the mist curls away from the ground like it's had its turn, and now it's someone else's shift to keep watch. You return to the village center where the fountain still trickles quietly. A few people are beginning to stir. One woman kneels beside a clay bowl mixing fresh herbs, thyme, mint, crushed sage. Another strings pouches onto a drying line like laundry. It's the morning routine now, like breakfast, like brushing teeth. Before breath scent. It's become almost instinctive here, a social habit so deeply embedded that no one questions it anymore. The herbs aren't superstition, they're structure. They are the first action of the day, a choice to make the air a little kinder before the rest of life comes rushing in. You step into a small workshop just beside the schoolhouse, where a young boy and an elderly man are carving small wooden discs. Each one has holes drilled in it and will be strung on leather cords. Pomanders, portable scent armor, not as elaborate as a plague mask, but infinitely more wearable for everyday folks. You ask if you can help. The old man grins and hands you a chisel. You begin carving. As you work, the old man tells you stories about his grandmother, who slept with lavender under her pillow, about the time he buried cloves in a jar during the last fever outbreak and dug them up a year later to find they'd grown stronger. You're not sure that's botanically accurate, but you smile anyway. Because this isn't just about herbs anymore. It's about remembrance as a craft. The boy hands you a bundle when you're finished, a new mixed sweet marjoram mint and something sharp you don't recognize. For your next steps, he says. And just like that, you realize you're not at the end of something. You're at the beginning of your own contribution. Plague doctors didn't just wear herbs, they carried meaning. They walked through the thick of terror with pockets full of scent and a face full of symbolism. Their masks said, "I am walking through your nightmare to bring order, however imperfect." Now it's your turn. You leave the village with a pouch at your side and a pomander around your neck, the scent of marjoram leading your breath forward like a thread. And as you climb the next hill, you think not about the plague, but about the people who scented through it. Mothers who tied lavender bundles for their children. Fathers who carved simple charms with rosemary tucked inside. Doctors who packed mint between pages of their notes. Children who pressed petals into their journals because it made the world less heavy. This is not about superstition. This is about agency. To scent your breath is to reclaim it, and that more than any mask or medicine might be the most powerful tool of all. By the time the sun clears the tree line, your shadow stretches long and golden across the hillside. The morning air is crisp with dew, still clinging to the grasses, and each step releases a puff of scent from the crushed herbs beneath your boots. Some wild mint here, a bit of chamomile there. It's not a path meant to impress anyone, but it's a path prepared for breath. You crest the ridge and see a winding road ahead, stone-lined and narrow, the kind that's more memory than infrastructure. But even here, the marks of herbal life remain. Small cloth bundles dangle from fence posts like offerings. Someone has scratched little breath poems into the wood. Sage for sorrow, bay for bravery, mint for memory. You pause and run your fingers over one of the engravings. It's been worn smooth by time and weather, but the intention lingers. That's the thing about scent, isn't it? Unlike stone or ink, it doesn't last, and yet it stays with you. The fragile permanence of aroma. You keep walking and pass a man sitting by the roadside with a crate filled with cloth sachets. No sign, no price tags, just bundles folded in rough cotton, each one hand-stitched with a little marked dots for calming stripes, for protection crescents for sleep. He gestures to the pile. "Take what you need," he says. You reach for one marked with a spiral. He smiles. "Ah, spiral, that's for remembering who you were before it all." You laugh softly, and in that moment it feels like something inside your ribs unknots. The sachet smells of rose and burnt cinnamon and something earthy like old leather warmed in the sun. Not what you expected, but exactly what you need. You keep walking, and now the road takes you past a graveyard, old and overgrown, the markers half sunk in the earth like teeth. But there are no statues, no mausoleums. Instead, there are herb beds between the rows, time creeping over names, lavender growing like a crown on one broken stone, a rosemary bush thick enough to hide a child beneath. This isn't a place of despair. It's a garden of ongoing breath. Someone here decided that remembering the dead didn't have to mean silence. It could mean scent. That a grave wasn't a place to hold your breath, but a place to inhale and remember. Historians still debate whether such practices were common. Were herbal grave offerings symbolic or spiritual? Did they truly believe the herbs warded off illness? Or were they simply rituals of emotional repair? Either way, they worked. You kneel by one marker that reads only M. A small jar rests beside it, sealed with wax. You open it gently. Inside, crushed mint lemon peel and dried violets. Still fragrant. Still fresh enough to rise with the morning air. You place your spiral-marked sachet beside it, a silent exchange. Breath for breath. Story for story. You rise and continue walking as the sun climbs higher. The road bends, and ahead, you see something unusual. A traveling scent cart pulled by a sleepy donkey decorated with ribbons and sprigs of rosemary braided into the reins. The woman leading it calls out to no one in particular. "Mint thyme smell for free, cure nothing but the soul." You step aside as she passes, and she tosses you a bundle wrapped in muslin. It lands lightly in your hands. You open it. Chamomile, dried orange peel, something like nutmeg. Your eyes close without thinking, and the warmth of the sun blends with the aroma in a way that slows the entire world down. For a moment, there's no plague, no panic, no history, only now, and this, and you. The cart rolls on, and you're left standing in the wake of a scent trail so gentle it feels like being touched on the shoulder by a memory. You sit beneath a crooked tree by the side of the road, the bundle still in your lap. You're not walking now. You're just being, and the air around you impossibly smells familiar. Like a page turned in a forgotten book. Like summer rain evaporating from a stone window ledge. Like the kitchen of someone who made tea when the world was loud. And you understand scent is how the past visits without knocking. You smile and lie back on the grass, letting the breeze carry your breath away for a while. You don't need to rush anymore. You've gathered what matters. And as the tree shades your eyes and the chamomile works its sleepy alchemy, you think one last thought before drifting. That plague doctor's those strange beaked figures in long coats weren't just walking history's most terrifying corridors. They were carrying gardens on their faces. Gardens made of belief, of care, of hope, pressed into petals. And so are you. The breeze that rustles through the leaves above you smells like afternoon warm sun on grass, distant cooking fires, and the faint bitterness of crushed herbs trodden underfoot. You sit up slowly, the muslin bundle still clutched gently in your hand. The orange peel and chamomile are fading now, their perfume softened by the wind, but the memory lingers. You rise, not because you must, but because there's one more place ahead calling you. A hill, the kind that doesn't appear on maps but everyone knows. You climb it slowly, the trail curving through tall grass and low stone walls that once marked property lines but now simply frame the path like history's half-finished sentence. Along the way, you spot more bundles, some new, some faded. A few have handwritten notes tucked inside. Breathe here. For Mother. In case of sorrow. You leave one of your own, tied with ribbon, filled with what little mint remains. When you reach the top, you see what draws everyone here, a small roundhouse, simple and circular, built from clay and timber. A kind of shrine, not to a god or a saint, but to air itself. You walk around the edge first, your hand brushing the thatch and plaster. Hanging from the walls are dried herbs in spirals and sunbursts, each arrangement a quiet explosion of color and scent. You step inside. It is silent. The roundhouse has no altar, no seats. Just an open floor, and in the center a wide clay basin filled with ashes and herbs. Not burned to nothing, no here. The herbs are only half charred, their shapes still visible, their smell still present. This isn't cremation. This is transformation. You kneel beside it. You breathe in what remains. Ashes of rose petals, cinders of time, whispers of cloves and orange rind. This is a memory fire. There's a ladle beside the basin carved from olive wood used not to stir but to gather scent. You take it carefully, scoop a bit of the warm ash, and let it fall into your palm. It's not hot. Not anymore. It just feels worn. Like time itself has cooled, crumbled, and curled into your fingers. You press your palm to your chest, and something settles there. A final kind of peace. Around the room you notice marking symbols etched into the clay spirals. Vines, simple beaked masks, stars. Some have words scratched beside them in dozens of languages. But they all mean the same thing. Breathe. That's it. No doctrine, no ritual. Just the instruction to continue, to participate, to persist. You step back outside, and the view from the hill stretches across the landscape villages tucked between fields, woodlands swaying in the wind, far-off roads where small figures walk and smoke curls upward from scattered chimneys, and above it all the air itself, vast, shared, fragile, unwritten, and in every inch of it the faintest, stubbornest echo of mint. You think of the masks again, not as grotesque symbols of fear, but as practical poetry. Each doctor who wore one walked into horror with a pouch of cloves in their nose and said, "I will face this, but I will not let it define how I breathe." You think of the child with a rose tucked behind one ear, the woman who mixed herbs at dawn, not because it would cure her, but because it gave her something to hold, the man who carved masks not for sale but for strangers, and the caretaker moving among sleepers refreshing their dreams with lavender and lemon balm. You think of yourself not as an observer, but now as a carrier of all of it. Scent is memory. Scent is choice. Scent is the way we press pause on panic. You pull the last of your bundle from your coat and scatter it at the base of the roundhouse wall, an offering. Not to be seen, not to be remembered, just to scent the ground for whoever comes next. And as you step off the hilltop and begin your descent, your steps slow, easy, your breath steady, a thought floats up like a leaf caught in warm wind. That long after the plagues are written down and the graphs drawn, long after the theories are settled and the books closed, someone somewhere will smell mint on the breeze and think, "Ah, we tried, we truly tried." The path down from the hill winds gently, as if reluctant to leave the height behind. The wind plays lazily in the grass, and the sun, now lower in the sky, glows with a golden softness that coats the landscape in warmth. You walk slowly. You're not rushing toward anything anymore. You're simply moving the way breath moves, effortless, patient, alive. The roundhouse fades from view behind the crest, but you carry it now. Not in your hands, not in your pouch. In your lungs, in the rhythm of your footsteps, in the way you no longer tense your shoulders when the wind changes direction. Ahead, a tree arches over the path, an old hawthorn twisted and half split from storms but still standing. Someone has left a braid of rosemary tied to one low branch. You touch it gently. The leaves are brittle but still fragrant. The smell is sharp, clean grounding. You smile. You don't need to take it with you. The scent has already entered your story. As you pass beneath its shade, a few birds scatter from the branches. Their wings beat the air just inches from your shoulder. You flinch, but only a little. Your first instinct is no longer fear. It's inhalation. And that tells you something. That tells you you've changed. You reach a low stone wall and sit for a moment watching the road unfurl ahead. You remember everything now, not as names and dates, but as scents. Lavender meant comfort, rose meant hope, mint meant courage, clove meant strength, and time meant endurance. All of it woven together in a history that no textbook could ever capture, because you weren't reading about it. You were breathing it. You take out your final herb bundle. It's small, a mix of fragments pieces from every pouch you carried, every gift you were given, every memory you chose to hold close. You unwrap the cloth, let the wind lift a few petals away, and scatter the rest at your feet. You don't need to hold on to it anymore, because now it holds you. The sun has dipped low, turning the clouds the color of old parchment and rose petals faded by time. The light grows longer, softer, warmer, as though the world is tucking itself in. Even the birds begin to whisper instead of sing. And you sitting here beneath the hawthorn tree, let your breath slow to match the rhythm of the earth winding down. You inhale, and the last traces of mint drift across your senses, faint, familiar. You exhale, and the tension leaves your shoulders with it. Inhale, and the world feels smaller. Exhale, and your place within it feels clearer. There's no rush now, no looming bell, no mask to wear, just breath, just you. You rest your hands in your lap, feeling the heat of the day soften into evening cool. The ground beneath you is solid. The wind against your cheek is gentle. And the silence is kind, not empty, but full of presence. Tonight, you don't need answers. You only need the air in your lungs. You've walked through fields and fire, past herbs and histories, through memories that clung not in your mind, but in the space behind your nose and above your heart. And now you are still. And the stillness is sweet. You close your eyes, and you breathe.